Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second day of the OMNI conference. Very quickly, I'll just review our community expectations. Number one, this is meant to be a safe space for learning. So we're here to just listen and be and let our students present their research and learn more from them. You want to encourage practicing patience with yourself and others, treating everyone with respect, dignity, and kindness, both to our presenters who have worked hard for this and for everyone here to support our presenters. We want to speak from personal experience and avoid speaking for others or generalizations. So please form your questions around that guideline. We know we're trying to give everyone a chance to speak, so be civil and try not to interrupt, and let us move forward like that. If you agree or disagree with, if you disagree with someone, just ask questions to better understand them and see their interpretations. So without further ado, our first presentation will be from Nicholas Clark, Seongwon Ko, and Zack. Their professor was their mentor was Professor Sean Ferosian. This is a pre-recorded presentation with the live 5 minutes live Q&A. Their title is Modeling the Spread of Misinformation on Social Media. This project uses differential equations to model the spread of misinformation on social media and determine which content moderation technique is most effective.
Hello, my name is Nicholas. Hello, my name is Nicholas Clark.
My name is Seongwon Ko.
Hey, my name is Zack, and we're under Coach Sean Ferosian at Miracosta College, here to present on Problem C, Modeling Social Media Content Moderation Techniques. Here's a brief introduction to the layout of our presentation. We'll begin with an overview of the goals and research that we established to build our models, and we'll dive into the model itself, discussing its assumptions, conditions, and coefficients. To assess the models, we'll then look at the results, especially qualitative analysis, the effect of changing the coefficients, and of course, how to interpret the results. To conclude, we'll answer the golden question: what does our model show? How effective are these content moderation techniques? And how accurately can we determine that? Which leads us into our overview. We have two main goals. We want to create a model that represents the situation as accurately as possible, which boils down to figuring out which content moderation technique is most effective at preventing misinformation. To guide these conclusions, we found a solid body of research that supports the following. In essence, it's proven that flagging posts is not an effective way to stop the spread of misinformation, and that censoring is much more reliable. Other key takeaways deal with the severity of the spread of misinformation, which will be discussed later in the presentation. With that in mind, we should briefly introduce the inspiration for our model, which is the SIR model. This equation is typically used to model the spread of disease in an epidemic, but in this case, we're going to use it to model the spread of information over time on social media. Normally, S is the population of the susceptible unexposed patients, I is the population of those infected, and R is of those exposed and then recovered. Of course, there's movement between each group, meaning S can travel to I and I can travel to R, and there's coefficients to illustrate this. Beta is the effective transmission rate between the S and I, and gamma is the recovery rate between I and R. So this SIR model gives us a really strong foundation upon which we can build our assumptions and eventually our models. And I'll leave that part to Seongwon.
The first assumption we made in our mathematical model is that the population for the model is closed, which indicates that there are neither new users nor members leaving the social media platform. Based on the SIR model, our model consists of three social groups as functions of time: ST for the number of uninformed social media users, IT as the number of misinformed individuals, and RT as the number of correctly informed individuals. Here, we assume that the population of ST can go to either IT or RT, but not vice versa. Because you can't return to being uninformed once you have seen the information. Yeah. Also, the population from I can move to R, and R can move to I. We assume that all interactions between social groups are one-on-one, and no social media users stay neutral. This implies that eventually the population of S will become 0, and it will be transmitted to either I or R. As you assume that the population is closed in our model, the sum of the rate of change for each compartment, S, I, and R, is 0. Our model focuses on examining the rate of change for the uninformed, misinformed, and correctly informed groups with respect to T. With coefficient of being the probability of S individuals moving to I per unit time, and coefficient B being the probability of S individuals moving to R per unit time, our model has ds dt equaling negative ASI minus BSR. We added two more constants, C and D, each representing the probability of I population moving to R per unit time, and the probability of R population moving to R per unit time. Accordingly, we have set di dt to equal as ASI plus d minus CIR. The ASI comes from the population pulled from S to I, and d minus CIR describes the exchange between I and R. Similarly, for dr dt, we set it equal to BSR plus d minus DIR, the difference between being that BSR describes the population pulled from ST to RT, and C minus DIR is the negative version of the term seen in di dt.
We then move on to the predictions of our model. To start, we define a variable alpha equals d minus c as our misinformation coefficient. This measures how effective the content moderation is relative to the misinformation. We then split this into three cases: one where alpha is greater than 0, one where alpha is less than 0, and one where alpha equals 0. In case 1, this means that D is greater than C, so there will be more movement from R to I, which in turn causes more individuals to switch from the correctly informed group to the misinformed. In case 2, we see the reverse, where C is now greater than D, which means that there will be more movement from I to R, leading to more people moving from the misinformed group to the correctly informed. Lastly, in case 3, we see a situation where D and C are equal, so this means that there is equal movement between I and R. The next prediction is that involves the coefficients A and B, which describe the flow from S to I and S to R respectively. We split this interaction into three cases, with the assumption that the initial populations of I and R are equal, shown as S of 0 is equal to R of 0. In case 1, A is greater than B, which means that there will be increased movement from S to I. In case 2, A is less than B, which means that there will be increased movement from S to R. And finally, in case 3, A and B are equal, which means that there are equal amounts of people going from S to I and S to R. The interaction between these coefficients show how effective the content moderation is before an individual is exposed to misinformation and when users are first being exposed. Next, we move on to our qualitative analysis. And the first one we did was on flagging posts. According to an MIT study, false news is 70% more likely to be shared online than the truth. And the initial speed of misinformation, the initial spread of misinformation could be 6 times higher than the truth. Another study found that flagging posts didn't affect the spread of misinformation, as individuals were less likely to believe the truth once they'd already been exposed to misinformation multiple times, which we refer to as repeated exposure, and that misinformation is easier to believe than the truth. Using this research, we concluded that the coefficients would change accordingly. A would increase, while B would decrease, which predicts more movement from S to I than S to R, leading to more people initially choosing to believe the misinformation rather than the truth. We also concluded that C would decrease, while D would increase, which shows more movement from R to I than I to R, leading to an increase of people moving from the correctly informed group to the misinformed, after they had already chosen a side. Next, we move on to the qualitative analysis of censoring. According to a study done by researchers at Yale and Boston University, censorship can be effective at stopping misinformation early and not allowing it to be viewed by multiple people. In turn, it stops repeated exposure to misinformation and allows the spread of the truth to catch up to the misinformation, which we established earlier as being inherently faster than the truth. In our qualitative analysis, we interpreted this as a few coefficient changes. In this case, A would decrease and B would increase, which means that there will be increased movement from S to R than S to I. This interaction shows more people believing the truth rather than misinformation initially. C would also increase, while D would decrease, which results in more movement from I to R than R to I. This shows that there's an increase in people believing the truth over the misinformation after they had already chosen a side.
Now that we've done some qualitative analysis on both the content moderation techniques, a couple of things have become pretty clear about their effectiveness. Like Nick mentioned, when using flagging posts, IFT eclipses RT, meaning there's a faster transmission of misinformation than fact, leaving more people misinformed than properly informed. On the other hand, when censoring is used, there's a much slower transmission of misinformation. Eventually, RT eclipses IFT, meaning that there are more informed people than misinformed ones. The conclusion is clear, and it agrees with both the research and our models. Censoring is a much more effective content moderation technique than flagging posts. But of course, we should ask, how valid are these models? So let's take a look at the strengths and weaknesses. The model's limitations lie mostly in the assumptions that we made. First, we have a closed population, which in a digital space like Twitter is not realistic with an acceptable error. Secondly, we assume that the uninformed population S of T goes to 0, meaning nobody stays neutral and all individuals become either misinformed or properly informed. That being said, the strengths of the models definitely outweigh these limitations. First of all, the coefficients we included allow for more dynamic population flow than a pure SIR model. Instead of only observing each population as a whole, we can see the nuanced flow of individuals between groups that we otherwise couldn't. Additionally, finding data that discusses each individual tweet about a subject is not easy to get, but this model solves that problem. How? Well, our results studied the ratio of populations, which is also a lot easier to interpret. That being said, in an ideal world, we would have access to as much data as we need. We could account for all the minutiae of something as intricate as information flowing in a social network. A better model isn't impossible, it just requires more study, which is the next step in our process of modeling the effectiveness of content moderation techniques using differential equations. Here's our references and sources that we discussed throughout the presentation, and thank you so much for taking the time to watch.
All right, thank you, Seongwon. We will now enter into our 5-minute Q&A session. Seongwon, it's only you, correct?
Yeah.
All right. So, any questions? Yes, Lauren has a question.
Yeah, hi. I love this line of research. It's super fascinating. I'm a librarian and I teach information literacy. And so I find that this type of mathematical thinking about misinformation and how to solve the problem is endlessly cool. So congrats to you all. Thank you for being here so I can congratulate you in person. But I think it's super cool work that you're doing. I hope you continue. Yeah, I was kind of curious. I was thinking about these issues, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with this idea about the dirty dozen. It's this idea that there's certain people who are really the main spreaders of misinformation. There's something like 12 people who are responsible for 60% of misinformation. And it led to YouTube, for instance, banning them, essentially censoring them, as your model kind of suggests is the right thing to do. There's just so many intricacies to the idea of misinformation. So I'm wondering, as you think about the way this model could be applied, do you think about it in a broad sense, or do you feel like there's nuances in terms of how it could be applied to different people?
I think it really this model can be applied to pretty various ways, because since I took library in the first year of Maricosta, I kind of have an idea that these misinformation can be started from a certain amount of people, small number of people, but it can affect people, a tremendous number of people. So, but this, our interpret, our graph shows, our model shows the misinformation can be spread really quick, and it really is since we take like all the coefficients into account, such as like we suggest A, B, and C, D. So I think it applies to pretty various ways, such as the misinformation that starts from like one Twitter post, and then it posts to like spread to all the people, and it just takes up all the people's feed and something.
Thank you.
Right, any other questions? Professor Sleeper noted this is an excellent work and could be the start of a senior capstone project, Seongwon.
I was noticing that if you were doing public policy, you already have the math figured out. So, I mean, you already have your potential method section, and I was really impressed. I've been doing a lot of work on these types of projects, and oftentimes this is great work. This is the sort of stuff that I hope you continue with. Have you thought about extending this into more research and a possibility of a summer research project or some sort of expanded research design? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I would like to, because when we were conducting this kind of project, we didn't have much sources like the data that really shows the number, like exact number of people who are really changes over time. So that we had to like predict the number and percentage depending on the scholarly articles, and the data that are found in really reliable sources. But still, we wanted to like build up like this model by using other data that are really like exact, and it shows like all the people of numbers and how people are affected as hours, hour by hour. So yeah, we would like to try it on it.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know we have the best reference librarians, right, Lauren? So yeah, if you want to take this project to the next place, you're all set. So
yeah, hit me up for sure. I love talking about this stuff anytime.
Yes, very interesting work. Very interesting work. So yes, maybe if you analyze some big sets of data that probably exist out there, then you can more precisely get those coefficients, and then you also see how those coefficients change. For example, from November to December, coefficients in general in some media changed, and then analyze why it happened. So yeah, there's lots of space really to do research here. Yeah, it's very interesting application of traditional models of differential equations, but for something that's very important nowadays. Everybody talks about this. Very nice talk.
Right, and thank you, Seongwon, and of course, if everyone could look at the commentary form in the chat, and also just give them a round of applause again. Thank you so much. Our next presentation is also by Seongwon Ko, mentored by Professor Zika Perovic. Hope I'm saying that right. It is a pre-recorded presentation with a live Q&A. It is called The Mathematical Interpretation on Geometric Image Processing Techniques. It is an analysis of the geometric transformation of an image using transformation matrix and interpolation methods.
Hello everyone, my name is Seongwon Ko, and I'm going to present about the mathematical interpretation of geometric image processing techniques. Before we start, I want to thank Professor Zika Perovic for his support throughout this project. So in this presentation, my goal is to mathematically interpret the image processing techniques that we use in our daily lives. Since geometric image processing techniques are frequently used in our society today, analyzing the math behind these concepts will help us better understand the technology. Here, I will introduce two mathematical concepts. First, linear interpolation, and second, transformation metrics. By going through how these mathematical concepts are used in image processing, I will also demonstrate several geometric image processing techniques using computer tools. First of all, the math concepts and techniques that we are talking about today are a part of computer vision, which is a science field studying how computers can gain a high-level understanding of digital images and videos. In demonstrating the image processing techniques, I will use a computer vision library of programming functions called OpenCV. So we're first going to talk about linear interpolation. As its name tells us, linear interpolation is a method of curve fitting using linear polynomials to create new data points. In other words, linear interpolation is the method of estimating a function that is placed in between the points that we already know. For example, if we are given 2 points, x0, y0, and x1, y1, linear interpolation will let us find a straight line between 2 points. For x in the interval x0, x1, y will be the value along the straight line between the 2 points that satisfy this equation at the bottom. Similar to this basic linear interpolation method, we can also use a method called a nearest neighbor interpolation. In this example below, let's say we have a 2 times 2 image, and we want to upscale this image by a factor of 2. Using this nearest neighbor interpolation, we fill out the values of missing pixels depending on the nearest pixel. Moving on to the bilinear interpolation, we can also estimate the values of the missing pixels. The fundamental logic we use in a bilinear interpolation is that we perform basic weighted average linear interpolation twice for rows and columns. First, we calculate the values for the endpoints of the column using linear interpolation in each row. Then, we use 2 values to estimate the values in a certain pixel point by repeating linear interpolation. Now, this code shows how linear interpolation is used in geometric image processing techniques. This code, I used nearest neighbor interpolation to shrink the size of an image. Compared to the bilinear interpolation that requires heavier calculation, nearest neighbor interpolation can be conducted faster and yields the accurate image as a result. Running the code, we can get a shrunk side image at the bottom of the original image. Similar to this previous code, we use bilinear interpolation to zoom in the image. While it is possible to use the nearest neighbor interpolation to zoom an image, bilinear interpolation yields a better result when zooming the image, since it takes both rows and columns into account when enlarging the size of an image. With a relatively more accurate output image, I'll use bilinear interpolation and got an enlarged image at the bottom of this original image. The next mathematical concept I would like to introduce is the transformation matrix. Basically, a transformation matrix is a linear transformation represented in a matrix. Considering T as a linear transformation mapping Rn to Rm, and X as a column vector, we can get Tx equals to Ax, where A is the transformation matrix of T. Through this method, we can also record the changes happening in space and conduct meaningful calculation in the real world. Going deeper into the vectors and matrices, I would like to introduce homogeneous coordinates, which represents coordinates in 2 dimensions with a vector in 3D space. In geometric image processing, this technique is necessary because we commonly treat transformations that are not linear. However, if transformation is not linear, it becomes much difficult to conduct calculations and manipulate vectors through computers. Therefore, We use this homogeneous coordinate method as a trick to treat a vector in 2 dimensions as a vector in 3D. Accordingly, we can perform geometric image processing techniques such as translations. First of all, we can use homogeneous coordinates and transformation metrics to perform translation of an image. When performing a translation of a vector xy over a vector t1 and t2, we can set the metrics this way. Without changing the alignment, we can change the position of an image easily with the metrics. In this code, I translated the original image 20 pixels to the x-axis and 30 pixels to the y-axis. By mapping a new vector, we can get an image shown in the bottom of the original image. The next image processing techniques is rotation. Using the metrics shown below, we can rotate the original image over an angle phi. While this method is separated from translation, it is possible to use both translation and rotation at the same time. Translating this matrix into a written code, we can write this code as shown in the left picture. This code keeps the size of an image the same as it rotates the image to pi over 2. As a result, we got our image rotated 90 degrees counterclockwise. Another technique I will introduce is affine transformation. Affine transformation is a geometric transformation that preserves line and parallelism while it does not preserve angles or distances. It also includes the method we introduced in previous slides, such as translation and scaling. However, one interesting point we have here is that it also inverts an image, which changes the color of an image. Through this code, we performed a affine transformation as shown in the right picture. One thing I would like to note is that the 3 dot points shown in the both picture and the right. In the original picture, the red dot and green dot are located in the same row, and the red dot and blue dot are positioned in the same column. After we perform affine transformation, we'll still see that parallelism of line is preserved since the change of position of 3 dots matches the changes in chessboard. However, it is clear that angles and distances are not preserved here. Lastly, we have a perspective transformation that preserves the collinearity of points, meaning that the transformation only preserves the linear identity of an image, and other features such as parallelism are not preserved. To perform a perspective transformation, we need input values of 4 points and output points. Here, we have an original image that does not preserve parallelism on the left side. While the railroad is obviously parallel, if we see it above the railroad, this change in perspective made each rail of the left side seem to be intersecting at the end. Through this code, I will eliminate the perspective of an image and come up with a result that shows the railroad as if we are looking at it above the railroad. First, we select the 4 points in the left picture to select the edge of the output image. Taking these 4 points as edges of an image, we change the perspective of an image using the metrics shown in the previous slide. As a result, we get the image on the right side. So in this presentation, we looked at how mathematical concepts, including interpolation and transformation metrics, are used in geometric image processing techniques. In current society, image processing is a crucial technology that enables us to communicate with one another, just like what we're doing right now. And it also helps humanity in various ways. For example, without using matrix transformation, we will not be able to quickly calculate the values of an image. The movements of an object in the video will not be natural and it will be lagging a lot. Taking that image processing techniques allow numerous cultures like movies and video games to flourish. It will be important to develop this technology and math concepts to come up with a better user experience. To do so, I would like to push forward this project and examine how math can be applied to other computer vision technologies. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
All right. Thank you so much, Seongwon. We will now enter into our 5-minute Q&A. And everyone just give him a round of applause. That's fantastic. Thank you for going twice.
I have a question. That was a great presentation. Really enjoyed it. So computer vision and interpolation is a very popular subject currently. I don't know if you followed the Kyle Rittenhouse or Rittenhouse, whatever his last name is, trial, but in it, they argued that, so there was a video and they were arguing that Kyle had a gun, but because they used interpolation, they were arguing that the object within the photo was not in fact a gun. So with images coming into being used as evidence and interpolation having the disadvantage that it can make objects a little bit more blurry or not as evident as they normally would be. What do you think would be the next step for computer vision to take so that interpolation doesn't conflict with the evidence?
So in this presentation, I just introduced 2 interpolation methods. But in the real world, there are really several interpolation methods that really come up with a sometimes pretty accurate image when we come up with an output. So, and I heard like recently there was like scientists invented a camera, really small camera that is that can be put into human body and then take a photo. And although the original image might be blurred, after like interpolation and image processing, we can come up with a really clear image. And these kind of AI system and all the technologies development, these can really bring up to predict the image and make it even more clear as an output image. So I think it's going forward right now. So.
Cool, thank you.
Any other questions?
That was an interesting question, Rolando. Yes, how much can we trust the images? The same thing with the Photoshop. So generally, technology gives you options to do something. And then, of course, we assume that it's done with the accurate source and that it was done with the honest intentions. And then if you want to manipulate images, like with every other aspects of technology, you can use it for good causes or for bad causes. And then it's not the fault of interpolation, it's fault of people's intentions. So you cannot avoid that.
I do have a question. What kind of what led you to be interested in this specific field of research, this specific topic?
Oh, so I really am interested in Photoshop and video editing, and sometimes it like I heard that mathematical concepts are related to Photoshop and these image processing, but I didn't know how they're really applied. So I wanted to find a relationship between them, and also because like these image processing techniques are getting even more important as we develop like AI technologies and other robotics. And since image processing is really applied to anywhere where any like industries, so I wanted to really conduct the project because so that I can really better understand these technologies.
Thank you.
Another question, and this one might be very basic, but is there a difference between like the interpolation algorithms that they use for just regular images and video footage? Especially since
do you mean by like methods? Or?
Yeah, like let's say I just took a picture and I want to correct it using some interpolation methods. Would that be a different process or different technique as opposed to, hey, let me go try to do this on a video?
Yeah, like although I really conducted this code on like perform this code in an image, it also can take like a video and process the video so I can really come up with another video that shows like a certain point, like zoom in so that I can, yeah, so it both applies to image and videos.
And
That's
you would
why
have to do, and you would have to feed it like pixel data or frames or screen captures. How would that
yeah,
work?
because like videos, like it's not a single picture, like single frame. So that's why like a calculation, like how quick the calculation is, it really takes into account. So that's why we use like matrix transformation to quickly calculate the image and pixel values and come up with like a better process videos or image.
Cool. Thanks.
Right then, thank you so much, Seongwon. Thank you for the questions, everyone. That concludes our 5-minute Q&A. Our next presenter is Timothy Lee. His mentor was Professor Lauren McFall. This is a pre-recorded presentation with a live Q&A, title of which is "You Spot the Sexism in Spotify's System." This is an analysis of Spotify's recommendation algorithms and the resulting consequences of gender inequality on their platform, exploring numerous studies and personally derived statistics to prove Spotify's sexist behaviors.
Hello. Did you know that despite Spotify's great popularity and community, it is likely to hold sexist motives through algorithmic bias? My name is Timothy Lee, and I am a part of the Honors program, and my research is Can You Spot the Sexism in Spotify Systems, which investigates Spotify's alleged bias against female artists in their algorithms. Before we delve into this presentation, it is important to keep in mind some things. I will be investigating Spotify's sexist algorithm. Spotify's sexist algorithm has not been confirmed or acknowledged by Spotify itself. It is also important to keep in mind that ignorance is dangerous, and awareness is the best solution to solving sexism in the digital age and platforms such as Spotify. Sexism may also be a result of simply the faults of the software, and it is not always the malice of the engineer that causes it. In this presentation, we will cover first, what algorithmic bias and Spotify are, and why it is important to address sexism in the digital world. Second, how do companies like Spotify use algorithms, and how does that impact bias in their platform, which numerous articles and studies will show support for. Third, I will share an original experiment I conducted looking at Spotify's playlists. And fourth, I will share some hope about how some organizations are working to end sexism in the digital world right now. It is very important to understand the great power that major media companies have over society. Media is a form of entertainment that greatly influences its users, hence the term social media influencers. Before there were social media influencers, there was always a set of behind-the-scenes influencers. Influence over people must be taken as both a responsibility and a privilege. In a technologically advanced media world, algorithms play a big role in how information is spread. So let's start by defining what an algorithm is. An algorithm is a set of rules in a process run by a computer that is engineered by humans. Essentially, it is an instruction set given to a computer who implement these rules into its programs. Algorithmic bias are systematic errors that result in unfair outcomes. In this case, we'll be discussing how these errors impact sexism, which is the prejudice between genders. Spotify's algorithmic bias has created unfair scenarios for women in the music industry. Many people make the mistake of assuming because a computer is generating the content that it must be free of human influence. However, here are some ways in which algorithmic bias can occur through human influence, such as sexist ideas. Essentially, anytime a human is involved, there will be human bias within it. It is important to understand the potential of sexism in a media platform prior to accusing Spotify of exhibiting such behaviors. Media platforms, algorithms, and gender prejudice all hold many connections in a digital age and society. Numerous researchers have investigated the possibility of a situation such as Spotify's algorithms promoting sexism. Journalism, social media, and social interactions all contain numerous instances of sexism. These cases of sexism can lead to lack of female representation, unfavorable circumstances for women in the music industry, which will discourage female artists, and further below the ratio of male to female artists being represented out of proportion, and further ignorance of social issues resulting from corporate greed. Currently, the music industry is made up of about 22% by females. This is an astonishingly low number since half the population is females. Women have just as much musical talent and passion as men, but why are they only 22% of the music industry? Because of an extreme lack of opportunities. Just as most industries and inner circles, women have been culturally excluded from receiving equal opportunities in the music industry. One great example of this is the lack of exposure in online streaming platforms such as Spotify. Spotify's algorithms have not only failed to put the spotlight upon female artists, but rather have pushed them out of that very spotlight. Just as all other areas of life, all people should be equal, regardless of gender. So a factor of this sexism that hinders equality in the music industry, Spotify, should be addressed and stopped. Research has proven Spotify to be a producer of sexist culture. For example, Sam Groves of University of Wire has investigated the Amplify and Equalizer were algorithms created by Spotify to create more gender-equal playlists. However, little to no results were produced due to lackluster efforts behind these programs, which exemplifies Spotify's lack of genuine care to prevent sexism in their own platform. Groves' research was done by analyzing Spotify's own take on the program and its actual results. Lots of the evidence was cited by Groves was personal observations of the programs, but his opinions were supported by the actual outcomes and results of these programs, and public opinion of them. Despite these so-called efforts by Spotify to discourage sexism on their platform, female artist opportunities are still being limited. Another example is an article by Madjidi of Chartmasters that shows graphics displaying the most streamed artists by gender, genre, and others, called the all-time most streamed artists. The article's graph shows a great margin between female and male artists on the top artists of Spotify. The graph displayed is titled Artists with Most 1+ million Songs on Spotify, which is meant to show the artists with the most songs on Spotify that have 1 million or more plays. Out of the 33 artists on this list, only 2 were female. These results are revealing of female dire circumstances in the music industry. Those who are upon the top artists in such charts gain great wealth and representation. Unfortunately, factors such as Spotify's algorithms have allegedly caused artists greater struggle to find success due to their gender. I wanted to test this out myself, so I performed my own research on Spotify's platform. I chose 3 of Spotify's playlists at random and calculated the ratio of male to female artists in the playlist. Prior to counting, I set rules and frameworks to my experiment. The playlist I chose would be created by Spotify and its algorithms, not by artists or users. I would count individual songs. For example, if Adele were to show up numerous times, every appearance would count as a female artist represented. The 3 playlists I chose to analyze were Hot Country, Soft Pop Hits, and Most Necessary, which are from various genres of country, pop, and rap, respectively. And the playlists I chose were gender neutral in both title and description. I would not be using playlists about promoting female artists or gender equality. I would only choose playlists that had no connection or bias when it comes to gender. Artists were classified as male or female based on their self-identified gender expression. Trans artists are classified as they classify themselves. Only the publishing artist's gender would matter. I would not take the gender of featured or collaborated artists into account. I would not count bands or groups unless they are full male or full female band groups. Hot Country is a playlist that is meant to display the top country hits of this week. These songs are well-known songs within the country genre and were put together by Spotify's algorithms. I first filtered the songs that contradicted my previously set guidelines for this experiment. This gave me a total of 52 amount of results to consider. Then I counted the female artists and male artists, and I ended up with 13 female artists being represented in the playlist and 39 male artists being displayed for a percentage of 25%. Soft Pop Hits description says listen to easy songs from your favorite artists. I would begin by filtering out the artists that were co-ed groups and featured artists. After counting, I found that the ratio of male to female artists being displayed on this playlist was an astonishing number of 76 to 24, for a percentage of 24% female representation. Most Necessary was described as the official voice of Generation Next. With a playlist that boasts the next generation and progression, perhaps it will have more progressive ideas and balanced sex ratios in its artists. I would begin by my filtering methods, then start counting female and male artists. After counting, I got 5 female artists to 45 male artists, which came out to the lowest percentage at an astonishing 10%. Through this experiment, I used the most accurate, efficient, and unbiased counting methods I could. I researched artists meticulously to ensure accuracy, yet Spotify's algorithms-based recommendation playlists yield extremely unbalanced sex ratios in its artists. The worst percentage of female artists from the three I counted was 10%, while the highest was 25%. The average percentage of female artists within a Spotify playlist was about 17%. This astonishingly low percentage is revealing of Spotify's algorithms' dire sexism. Research has not only shown the high possibility of Spotify's algorithms being sexist, but these results only agree with this statement. I decided to compare these statistics from Spotify to another chart of artists. I chose the Billboard Hot 100, which is a list of the top artists by sales, radio plays, and online streams. I used the exact same processes and methodology I used for the list that I did for Spotify playlists, and it ended up with some astonishing results. The percentage of female artists being represented in the chart was 33%, which is nearly double the average female representation of Spotify's playlists of 17%. The fact that the Billboard Hot 100 uses more sources to create its lists than Spotify's algorithms and ended up with twice the amount of female artists than Spotify's playlists is truly remarkable and revealing of Spotify's algorithm sexism. Despite this dire situation of Spotify's algorithms, numerous organizations are making efforts to suppress the progression of sexism in society. The organizations Institute for Internet and the Just Society and Music Tomorrow are dedicated to researching, investigating, and exposing the dilemma of the digital age and sexism in our society. The Institute for Internet and Just Society has the mission to cultivate the digital world into a place of equality and freedom. This institute is dedicating itself to launching projects and programs that carry out their mission, such as Project Aristotle, which is meant to investigate the translation of politics, philosophy, and society from real world to digital world. Similarly, Music Tomorrow also strives to provide numerous services such as the research on the current state of the music industry and its connections to the digital world. Spotify's efforts to enhance the efficiency of their own company have resulted in promoted sexism. History has proven the great potential of such an occurrence, and extensive research exposes Spotify's current exhibitions of sexism. Not only has Spotify promoted sexist views in order to enhance efficiency and profits, but research also reveals the great prevalence of negative societal influences from all forms of media. Despite these hindrances upon society's progression by media companies, organizations are working tirelessly to combat this. This research's significance lies in the fact that both the digital world and society is attempting to progress for the greater good, yet instances such as Spotify's algorithms reflect signs of competition between these two rather than harmony. It is important to expose and suppress Spotify's actions and the lack of counteraction, which have resulted in a dire negative impact upon its users through gender prejudice. And that will conclude my presentation and research. Can you spot the sexism in Spotify systems? Thank you for listening, and have a great day.
Awesome presentation, Timothy. We could just give him a round of applause. Very well done. We will now enter into our 5-minute live Q&A. So you can either use the reactions or put a question in the chat. I see we have Lauren. You may, yes.
I am just so proud of you, Timothy. I think this is such a cool project. And I just want to make sure everybody in this room knows that you are still a high school student. So you really brought it, and it was a very cool presentation. I would love to see you continue this line of research. I think there's so much potential for identifying the ways that Spotify can be considered sexist. And I really enjoyed that you looked at it from a solution perspective as well. I guess I'll ask a question, which is just what do you think? What do you think would be like something next that you might consider looking at, whether related to this specific platform or other work?
I think that another thing I would like to research after this would be something similar to investigating sexism in the digital age, but instead of investigating Spotify's algorithms, perhaps another system, perhaps like YouTube or Instagram, just other more modern forms of media that have been like taking over the industry these days that could be extremely impactful upon our society without us even knowing about it.
Thanks, and I really appreciated that you also compared it to already existing sexism in society and through these industries. So I think that's important to point out, right? Because it's not that this is a new phenomenon, but it's a new phenomenon in a new realm. So thank you again, Timothy.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Wonderful.
So Spotify uses artificial intelligence essentially to create a profile about you. So I am curious to get your thoughts on this. So the way that Spotify's algorithm works is it first will kind of figure out what people your age or your demographics are listening to. Then it will start matching what you like, and then it will create this profile for you. And third, it will go out in the World Wide Web and look for that song, and it will analyze it using a neural network. And it will create a profile for this song. And based on that, it will create recommendations for you. Now, it is not new for artificial intelligence to become sexist or become racist. Microsoft had the same problem. They created a neural net that learned to behave like a human in Twitter and became racist. So my question is this: to what extent can you blame the company itself or the society where this neural network is learning from? Because it happened to Twitter, it happened to Microsoft, and it seems that it's happening to Spotify. Just because from a programmer standpoint, a programmer doesn't go in there and tells the algorithm, hey, this is a female artist and this is a male artist. It's very difficult to manage that when there's learning by itself happening.
I don't think the main problem with Spotify is like sexism that's showing in their like playlists and recommendation algorithms doesn't stem so much from actual Spotify creating the problems. I'm sure like the software engineers are not intentionally causing these issues, but I feel that a lot of the issues do stand in the fact that Spotify has showed little to no efforts in trying to stop this from continuing. As we saw in my research on Amplify, which is one of the programs they made to basically amplify the voices of female artists, which was a complete flop and showed little to no like complete effort or funding to push female artists out into the spotlight, which I think that is really more the issue that we need to be investigating, not so much the initial part, but Spotify's reactions to it seem to be very lackluster.
So would you recommend for Spotify to take down their algorithms?
I would say that, well, awareness is key, and that as society or like we as users of Spotify become more aware, Spotify will have to take action, and they may need to adjust their algorithms or create more programs like Amplify that are actually better, well-funded and put more effort into them to actually like take action and actually fix this issue.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Professor Chan said that the gender difference is striking. Do you think that the disparity is changing through time?
I did not actually fully delve into Spotify's change in gender disparity over time. I've only checked the more recent ones for more recent and accurate suggestions of their algorithm bias. But I do feel that as time goes on, that it will not like just improve just based on time, that we cannot just sit around and wait for sexism to just go away. We need to be working actively and with proactiveness to solve this issue, and Spotify should do the same as we push this forward and like push equality in genders and everything in general in our society.
All right. Professor Sleeper, should we continue, or would you like your question answered?
You can ask one more question. We've got 5 more minutes.
Right, that's why I was asking. Okay, our last question comes from Professor Sleeper. He says, "You rock," but do you think that there's a financial motive for Spotify's algorithm being sexist?
I do feel that there is some financial motive that they've taken. For example, their lack of effort to push programs like Amplify can be from a financial standpoint, since of course it does cost more money and more financial hindrance to push females out into the spotlight, because if they continue to do what they are in the most financially gaining standpoint, where they continue to just push out whatever artists like is more popular in their algorithms, then they'll continue to make more money. But in doing this, they fail to put females into the spotlight, and it will take some, what you could call it like a pay cut or just like less profits to push these females out there. But in doing so, then they can create a more just society and just equality in genders, which will be just for the greater good.
Right, then thank you so much. Everyone give him a hand. Awesome. I really love the details, the theme in that presentation. That was awesome, matching the Spotify. I, I remind everyone that there's the intake form in the chat to give feedback. We will now go into about 13-minute break, starting up again at 11:10, beginning with Brady Nicol. Thank you, everyone. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being at our second day of OMNI, and thank you for joining our second session today. We have 3 presentations lined up for you. Before we begin, I just want to review our community expectations. 1, know that this is a safe space meant for learning, and we're here to grow from each other's knowledge. 2, practice patience with yourself and others, treating everyone with respect, dignity, and kindness. To the presenters and to the attendees. Speak from personal experience and avoid speaking for others or making generalizations. Give everyone a chance to speak and don't interrupt others, be it attendees or the presenters themselves. If you disagree with someone, ask questions to better understand their intentions, offer their explanations or alternative interpretations. So our first presentation of the second session is by Brady Nicol. His mentor was Professor Zika Perovich. This is a pre-recorded presentation with a live Q&A. The title of which is Mercen Primers and the Perfect Numbers, an exploration of both an open question unsolved for thousands of years and its beautiful connection to the prime numbers. So without further ado, let us begin.
Hello, my name is Brady Nicol, and this is my presentation on the Mercen primes and the perfect numbers. So the Mercen numbers are numbers of the form 2 to the n minus 1, where n is any natural number. They are named after the mathematician depicted on the right. Excuse my pronunciation, but his name is Mercen. He asked questions about their primality. So whether these numbers were prime and how often they were prime. And so the Mercen primes are just the Mercen numbers which happen to be prime numbers. So if I list the first 5 here, you can see that they don't include all the primes by any means, right? There's quite a few missing from there. 5 is missing, 11 is missing, and so forth. But we can also notice that they grow really big, really fast, right? 8,191 is quite a bit bigger than 127, and so forth. And if we list the next 5, you can see they grow enormously large, right? That number on the right is 19 digits long, and that's only the 10th Mercen prime. So there's a very interesting pattern amongst the Mercen numbers and the Mercen primes. If you list the first 7, let's say, Mercen numbers, and you cross out all of the composite numbers, so and 1, of course, because 1 is in prime, that will leave you with the Mercen primes, right? Because these are all the non-composite Mercen numbers. If you look at their exponents, you see that it includes all of the prime numbers up to that point, of course, which is interesting. And it's not immediately obvious why that would be true. And so a natural question would be, well, what about 11, right? What about 2 to the 11 minus 1? Is that prime? Well, 2 to the 11 minus 1 is equal to 2,047. And actually 2,047 is equal to 23 times 89. That is not prime, which is very sad. However, on the bright side, we can show something quite interesting about the Mercen primes, and that is they require a prime exponent to be prime. that's kind of why we were seeing that pattern there. If a Mercen number has a composite exponent, then it is immediately composite, and that rules out that number from being a Mercen prime. To do so, we will use the formula that x to the n minus 1 is equal to x minus 1 times the geometric series on the right, right over here. You can see that this works by kind of foiling it out, and you see that the first term of this kind of expansion cancels with the second term of this expansion, and so forth. So if you consider a Mercen number of the form 2 to the ab minus 1, where a and b are both greater than 1, so that ab is a composite number, if we let 2 to the a be x, then we get that 2 to the ab minus 1 actually equals x to the b minus 1, which should look familiar because it's part of that formula on the top. And that means x to the b minus 1 and hence to the ab minus 1 equals that product of two integers, which of course can't be prime. And thus, if a number n is composite, then 2 to the n minus 1 is not prime. But who cares, right? Why care about the Mercen primes? They just seem like a special case of the prime numbers. So what's so special about them other than they're sometimes slightly interesting properties? Well, consider the problem of checking if a number is prime. How would you test if 97 is prime? Well, a common method is to basically check all the primes below it and see if they divide it, and if they don't, then it has to be prime, right? And a very systematic way to do this is with a sieve, or with the sieve method. So what you do is you list the first, let's say 100, because 97 is less than 100, and you cross out one because that's never prime, right? Just by definition. And then you circle the first prime that hasn't been, or the first number that hasn't been crossed out yet, or so that's 2, and you cross out all of its multiples because 2 is prime, so you gotta cross out all those because they can't be prime anymore. You do this, and then you continue on with 3. That's the next number that hasn't been circled or crossed. You do the same, you cross out all of its multiples that haven't been crossed out yet, and you continue with 5 and 7, and then you stop once you get to 11, because 11 squared is actually greater than 100, right? 121 is greater than 100, and so it actually can't eliminate any more numbers from this list, and so you can circle the remaining numbers, and those are all prime, and you can see 97 is prime. That's all fine and dandy, but then the question arises, well, how would you do it with a much larger number, like this 20-digit number I listed? And it turns out that number actually is prime, but it would be very difficult to test using the sieve method. It turns out the algorithmic complexity of this sieve is n log n, which is close to the number itself. And so if you have numbers that are millions of digits long, or it would be almost impossible for a computer to handle performing a sieve with those numbers. But as it turns out, the Mercen primes can be tested for primality in a much less computationally demanding way through the Lucas-Lemmer test. So if you define a function recursively as follows, you let the first term of a sequence be 4, and then all the terms after that are the previous term squared minus 2. So you get, you start with 4, and then the next one will be 4 squared, 16 minus 2, that's 14, and so forth. 14 squared is 196, minus 2 is 194. You see those numbers go quite quickly, but as it turns out, a Mercen number, 2 to the p minus 1, is prime if and only if you go to the sequence, you look at the p minus 2 place, you take that Lucas sequence number, and if that Mercen number divides that Lucas sequence number, then it turns out that that Mercen number is actually a prime. And so what a computer can do is it can perform this test using modular arithmetic, squaring a number and then reducing it and so forth. And it can check if a Mercen number of the form 2 to the p minus 1 is prime with an algorithmic, or with basically p steps. which is much better than n log n. However, it's still quite difficult, right, to do so as you get to like millions of digits long. And so when you're searching for larger and larger prime numbers, right, it's much easier than the Sieve method. So as it turns out, the 5 largest known primes are actually all Mercen primes because they're easy to check primality, right? But again, right, it's still enormously difficult. 2 to the 82,589,933 minus 1, that is an enormously large number. It's still going to take a computer forever to check. So, as it turns out, there is an organization called the GIMPS, which is dedicated to searching for larger and larger Mercen primes. And what they do is they take volunteers who are willing to lend their computational power, and those volunteers download the GIMPS software on their computers. And when their computer is idling, the GIMPS software basically boots up and starts basically running the computations to check if these numbers are prime. And if you download this software, you might be lucky enough that your computer actually finishes one of those computations and discovers a new Mercen prime. And this one at the top was discovered by a lucky fella in Florida, just some random guy, which is pretty fun. Okay, now the perfect numbers are numbers which are equal to the sum of their proper factors. So here are some examples. 6 is equal to 1 plus 2 plus 3, and its factors are 1, 2, and 3. And 28, its factors are 1, 2, 4, 7, and 14, and it equals the sum of those numbers, which is just kind of fun. It's interesting. Now, the thing you might be asking is, well, what about in 6's case? What about 6? 6 is a factor of 6. Well, as it turns out, 6 is not a proper factor of 6 because a proper factor is all the factors not including itself. But alternatively, you can define a perfect number as a number which is equal to half the sum of its factors, its normal factors. So 6 is equal to half of the sum here, which is 12. Now, it turns out the perfect numbers are actually intricately connected to the Mercen primes. If you list out the first 5 perfect numbers, you might see a pattern here. All the perfect numbers are a product of a Mercen prime, 3, 7, 31, 127, and so forth. Those are Mercen primes, and a power of 2 on the right. So if you write them out like this, you might see a pattern between those Mercen primes and the specific power of 2. So I'll give you maybe 20 seconds to see if you can notice that. Well, as it turns out, the power or the exponent of the Mercen prime is always 1 greater than the exponent of the power of 2. So 2 is 1 more than 1, 3 is 1 more than 2, 7 is 1 more than 6, and so on. And why does this work is what you might be asking, which is a very natural question. So if you consider a Mercen prime of the form 2 to the p minus 1, where p is a prime, and you let it be q, then q times 2 to the p minus 1, so that is 2 raised to the power of p minus 1, has factors, has the following factors. So you can kind of consider the factors that don't involve q. So those are just the powers of 2 up to 2 to the p minus 1. And the ones that do involve q, which are those factors at the top here, but just multiplied by q. And so the sum of those factors will be q plus 1 times this sum right here, the sum of those powers of 2, like so. And q plus 1, of course, is 2 to the p, because q is that Mercen prime. And then the geometric series sums actually to 2 to the p minus 1. And if you, as you can see, 2 to the p minus 1 is actually the Mercen prime itself, q. And so we get that this is actually equal to twice the original number, which is how we define the perfect numbers at the beginning there. So those are perfect numbers, but that's about all we know about the perfect numbers. There are actually two very important open questions pertaining to the perfect numbers that we have been unable to answer for thousands of years. And they're actually quite simple to understand, but they're very difficult to prove or to come up with an answer with. So the first one is, are there infinitely many Mercen primes? And consequently, because each Mercen prime has its respective perfect number, are there infinitely many perfect numbers? And we have no idea. Yeah, it's been an open question since the Greeks, and yeah, we've still made very little progress into this problem. So that is something you can think about and consider. And the next one is, do any odd perfect numbers exist, right? Because all of the perfect numbers we saw were a product of a Mercen prime and a power of 2. And a power of 2, of course, makes that product even. And so the question is, well, do any odd perfect numbers exist? We know that if one does exist, it has to be enormously large. And it has to have like something like 75 factors or something, or 75 different prime factors. But again, yeah, we have made very little progress other than that into this problem, and it's very simple to state, but it's very difficult to make any headway into. But it's just a fun question to think about. Well, that is my presentation on the Mercen primes and the perfect numbers. So if you have any questions, please let me know. And if you're interested, that is the 16th Mercen prime. That's 2 to the 2,203 minus 1, and it's got that many digits, which is pretty wild to think about.
Hello.
Thank you so much, Brady. That was interesting and fascinating. Interesting number at the end. We will now go into our 5-minute Q&A session. So anyone have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or use the reactions. And also, before I forget, let's give him a hand.
So should I just pick out questions from the chat and kind of answer them?
I can read them, or anyone can just unmute as well.
Okay.
Are there any questions? No, no questions at the time. Then I do have a question. How did you stumble upon this mathematical concept, and what, why did you begin researching it, or how did you learn about it?
Yeah, so in my discrete math class, we were talking about different methods we were talking about primes actually, and one of the things that came up were different methods for testing whether a number is prime, like the Sieve method that I mentioned, and we found how difficult it was to check for larger and larger prime numbers. And one of the things my professor mentioned was that the Great Internet Mercen prime search, which was for finding those huge, huge prime numbers, which have millions and millions of digits. And that was just really mind-boggling to me. And so I thought I would check it out. And at the time, I didn't know what the Mercen numbers or the primes were. And so I just researched them a little, and I found out about the whole subject. And I thought it was really interesting, and that's how I kind of decided to do my honors project on that.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions from the chat or yes, Professor Sleeper?
So Brady, what's your major or career goals? And this is a great project because oftentimes I try to explain to my students that you're going to run up against obstacles. What were some of the obstacles that you ran into, right? Because you said that this is there's a lot of different nuances about this project. How does kind of confronting these obstacles prepare you for your kind of career choices and future research projects?
Yeah, so I am I want to be a computer science major, and so kind of some of the challenges that I ran into with this project, there were a couple of them. One of them is that a lot of the kind of like mathematical proofs and stuff like that could be challenging for a lot of these tests. A lot of this is like more recent kind of discoveries into these problems, and so a lot of the math is kind of complicated towards some of these, like the Lucas Lemmer test. And I guess another issue was that sorry, I had it in my brain, but I completely forgot it. So I guess I'll continue on. But yeah, a lot of, I suppose, computer science is, I guess, considering those kind of, it's a lot of math and considering those kind of theoretical ideas. And so I think my honors project probably helped me by introducing me to those kind of concepts and stuff like that.
Well, you did a nice job personalizing the topic, and I thought it was very easy and well done. Excellent to follow. Great job, Brady. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Dan. And he says, Brady, when you were working on your presentation, did you have to take into consideration how to present it in a way that would be more digestible for a more casual, non-mathematical minded audience?
I would say there were some aspects that I had to leave out, like some of the more difficult proofs, like the Lucas Lemmer test proof. But other than that, there wasn't too much that I had to leave out. A lot of it is very, again, like simple to understand, like those open questions. They're just very hard and difficult to prove, right? Or like those open questions are hard to prove, but at least on a basic level, the Mercen primes and the perfect number, excuse me, sorry. The Mercen primes and the perfect numbers are pretty simple to understand, so I didn't really have to dumb it down too much for my presentation.
Awesome, thank you. We have time for another question or two. Anyone else? No? I guess I do have one last question. This is are there any other mathematical concepts like this that you would consider looking at? I know very elementary, some stuff like Pascal's number or that the triangle or the golden ratio. Are there any other, maybe lesser known kind of mathematical concepts like these that you find interesting?
Yeah, there's one actually. It was what my honors project was going to be on originally. It was called the Vermont Numbers. So they're kind of like the Mercen numbers. They're numbers of the form 2 to the 2 to the n plus 1, which sounds very similar. And they have applications actually to Euclidean geometry. So they tell you what kinds of polygons, or I think it's called normal or something like that. Normal polygons can be constructed using a compass and a straight edge. So that's a pretty interesting topic if you found this presentation interesting.
Right, thank you so much. I'm aware of the collapsed numbers as well, but thank you. Everyone, give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. We will now move on to our next presentation. Yes, we will now move on to our next presentation by, I'm so sorry, not very good with the Zoom stuff right now. Next presentation, yes, by Jonathan Bandemer. His mentor was Professor Sam Atamad. This is a pre-recorded presentation with a live Q&A, the title of which is Viasat, a comprehensive analysis, which is a financial analysis of the communication company Vyasa.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Bandemer. This is a financial analysis of the company Viasat for my honors contract for my financial accounting course by Mr. Atamad. I chose this company because, one, their headquarters are right in my backyard. I've been on their campus, and it's just always been kind of something that's interested me. So here we go. Start off with just a little history of the company. Viasat was started in Carlsbad, California in 1986 by founders Mark Dankberg, Steve Hart, and Mark Miller. After 10 years in business, Viasat had its initial public offering in December of 1996 when the company began trading under the ticker symbol VSAT. Later, in 2006, the ComSat Laboratories division won the development contract for the first space communications testbed from NASA. Then, Viasat was awarded a contract by the U.S. Defense Information Systems Agency to provide global in-flight broadband and communication services for the government aircraft. Since then, they have continued to make advancements in the competitive satellite and communications industry. Most recently, they are planning the launch of their Viasat-3 satellites. At their core, Viasat is a communications company. They provide broadband communications through their own satellites for both commercial and government use. Commercially, they supply consumers, enterprises, commercial airlines with mobile broadband both internationally and abroad. This also includes space-to-Earth connectivity systems, customer premise equipment, satellite modems and antenna technologies, satellite payload development, and ASIC chip design. After securing their first government contract with the U.S., Viasat has continued to work with the U.S. government on various projects and contracts focusing on intelligence and defense. This year, 2021, marks the third consecutive year with over $1 billion in contracts awarded to Viasat. Here we have Viasat's income statement for the trailing 12-month period ending October 31st, showing revenues, expenses, and operating income. Here's the balance sheet for Viasat's current financial position as well as the previous year's balances. Using this, along with the income statement, we can use ratios to compare the company to competitors in the market. The current ratio measures liquidity. Viasat's current ratio for 2021 is 1.4. When compared to the industry average of 1.7, as well as an overall downtrend for the past 10 years, indicate that Viasat continues to increase their debt position. Viasat's acid test ratio, measuring immediate liquidity, is 0.92. When compared to the industry average of 1.24, it shows that Viasat is very leveraged and indicates their potential ability to service short-term obligations is less than favorable. Measuring how effectively assets are used, Viasat's asset turnover is 0.45. Comparing Viasat and two of its competitors, as well as Viasat's asset turnover for the past 10 years, it shows that while internally decreasing, they are on par with competitors. Compared to the U.S. corporate debt levels and competition, Viasat's debt-to-equity ratio of 93.62 points to a highly leveraged position using debt via lenders as opposed to funding through equity via shareholders. Viasat's 2021 profit margin is 0.16. Viasat's industry has massive variation in profit margin quarter to quarter, year to year, and this is not uncommon. Over time, this results in an industry average profit margin that is nearly zero. Viasat's trailing 12-month PE ratio of 112 compared to its fiscal year PE of 973 and an industry average of 32 indicates a large variance in earnings and share price for Viasat. For any major company within a competitive market, there are bound to be challenges, and Viasat is no exception. The first of these challenges comes from the nature of the satellite and communications industry. With competition continually increasing and a rapidly changing technological environment, predicting new technology that will be introduced into Viasat's marketplace is nearly impossible. In Viasat's commercial segment, they are witnessing industry consolidation and vertical integration. This farther enables their competitors to offer competing services. With nearly 50% of total revenue coming from government services, Viasat also faces the risk of having a lack of diversified revenue streams. Furthermore, only a few government contracts make up a significant percentage of this revenue. Additionally, Viasat has only a few third-party suppliers for products and components, leaving them exposed to supply chain issues. Not only is it difficult to design, develop, and produce proprietary technology, they also have a limited ability to protect said technology from competitors. The final fundamental challenge Viasat faces is their indebtedness. With nearly $2.5 billion in debt, this may adversely affect their ability to run their business or adapt to changes in the company or industry. Viasat, as a growth company, is always striving to grow in every sector. For 9 out of the past 10 years, they have managed to grow revenue consistently year over year. For satellite services, they believe the main driver for continued growth will be the increase in internet users, connected devices, and data usage across the world. This will include growth in their award-winning and industry-leading in-flight broadband connectivity services, or IFC. Commercially, Viasat looks forward to increased global demand for ground networking equipment and products facilitating access to cost-effective technology in order to provide a large number of people with broadband services. Finally, within their government segment, they foresee a growth in overall demand for their products and services. And this all is in response to the US military's new emphasis on a network-centric mobile warfare goal. This will require development into secure satellite and IP-based communication services. And given Viasat's existing relationship with the US military, one can reasonably expect accelerated growth in this sector. Viasat has released their first ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance report this year in 2021. They claim that because of their unique position, ambitions, resources, and skills, they are qualified and capable of addressing very complex but crucial global environment and social issues. Throughout the report, they focus on their commitment to fulfilling the 4 pillars of putting people first, powering connections, protecting the planet, and leading with integrity. Over 1,300 global organizations receive support from Viasat employee programs. In Brazil, Viasat has helped connect thousands of government sites and millions of students under the Brazilian e-government initiative, bringing broadband access to unconnected people across the country. They also partnered with Telebras to connect 2.5 million students whose school had no or substandard internet service. On a broader scale, they are utilizing renewable energy sources and efficient infrastructures in order to reduce their carbon footprint. And these are just a few of the most significant efforts mentioned in their ESG report. All the financial ratios indicate that Viasat is in a fairly typical state for a growth company. They are reinvesting their profits back into the long-term growth of the company rather than prioritizing profits or paying out dividends to shareholders. A company in the growth stage is generally a higher risk investment as they are less established and have risk associated with high levels of debt. But on the other hand, there is also a potential for higher levels of return. A major strength Viasat has over some of its competitors is the fact that they produce, control, all of their own satellites. Their recent $7 billion acquisition deal with UK-based satellite company Inmarsat also greatly improves their market position by enhancing global scale and diversifying their revenue sources. However, the fact remains that they are vulnerable to losing a large portion of their revenue if they cannot continue to secure these large government contracts. While owning the satellites was previously noted as a strength, there's also increased liabilities with owning these. There's complications that may arise in the systems, equipment, or outdated technology. Based on all of this information and analysis, my recommendation to Viasat is to nurture their acquisition of Inmarsat by building upon the existing network, customer base, and infrastructure. This could address the majority of initial concerns and threats by diversifying and rebalancing their revenue sources, could provide access to more manufacturers and global customers, and will overall better their position to compete with an increasingly consolidated and vertically integrated industry. That brings me to the end of my conclusion, or the end of my presentation, and I'll open the floor to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Jonathan. We will now go into our live 5-minute live Q&A. We already have a question in the chat from, and before that, also just give him a round of applause. Thank you so much for that. Yes, we already have a question prepared from in the chat from Professor Adamat, and he asks, how are supply chain issues affecting Vyasa?
Yeah, so the main kind of threat that they see is that because they only have a few manufacturers that they can get, specific components for something like a satellite, is that they don't really have any other options. If something were to happen to this manufacturer, they can't produce it on time. They can't get access to materials. So like we've seen with COVID, supply chain stuff has just gone kind of insane. And so if something were to happen where this particular manufacturer can't get the component that Viasat needs, then they don't really have any other option to go to a different manufacturer. Then this could push back timelines such as their new release of their satellites. They can't get components. It pushes back nearly everything in their plan. So right now they haven't seen too much of a problem with it. It is just an overall concern though. And so that new acquisition of the UK satellite company Inmarsat, if they could use and kind of get access to some of their manufacturers, it greatly help with that concern for sure.
All right, thank you so much. Our next question comes from Dr. Chan in the chat. Do other aspects of the pandemic affect the company too?
They haven't seen too much of a decrease in revenue due to the pandemic, especially because communications isn't something that's really negotiable. It's not a luxury, it's kind of a necessity for, especially with government. Military stuff is one of their biggest revenue sources. So they really haven't, toned down their revenue in terms of that. And so we haven't seen too much of a decrease at all. Again, supply chain issues were a slight concern, but they haven't had many issues yet. So they've held up very well.
Any other questions, be it from the chat or from the audience? Just feel free to unmute.
Knowing what you know about the company, is it a place where you would recommend people seek employment based on, how stable they are or not, and their trends, where they're going as a company?
Yeah, I believe so. Yes, I've actually looked at internships there myself. And so overall, I think that's I've been on their campus. I've talked to quite a few of their engineers. Like I said, their headquarters I can see them from my back door. So they seem to have a great outlook, kind of a great work environment. I would definitely recommend it. And like I said, I'm looking into internships there myself.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for a few more questions. Are there any other?
I just have a kind of a overall question about the presentation. So if one of your friends approach you in regard to investment in Viasat, what is your overall understanding? Would you recommend it to a friend to make that investment, or would you be cautious about that?
Okay, a couple things. It depends on kind of where they are and what they're looking for. It depends. If you're, a peer, somebody my age, somebody that's willing to kind of do a little research and almost not trade it, but just be wary of their stock price is affected by, like Christopher said, defense bills and contracts they get. So they are a little bit more volatile than, something like S&P 500. And if you're willing to look at that, like I said, there is kind of the potential for higher levels of return. But if you're in a different point where kind of you're saving, investments for retirement, you're a little older, you don't have, the time to stick through some of the tougher times in something like this growth company, then probably not. But personally, I have traded their company quite a bit. But then again, I'm watching different news outlets and things that will affect their stock price. So in that case, yes. But if you are a passive investor that wants, consistent, solid returns, then probably not. I would caution away from it.
Awesome, thank you. Again, wonderful presentation. Let's give him a hand for that again. As well as, I forgot to mention this, but there is the commentary form for both this presentation and the past presentation by Brady, and for feedback. Our next presentation is by Joshua Greer. His mentor was Professor Kyle Thompson. This is a live presentation followed with a live 5-minute Q&A, and the title of which is Making Meaning of a Digital Life, a proposal to practice mindful examination of our digital lives using Buddhism or existentialism. Without further ado, Joshua, you have the stage.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Joshua Greer. Today we'll be making meaning of a digital life. So social media has become more relevant as time passes on. We're now in the digital age, and so what I really wanted to tackle with my research project was how to rationalize the digital existence. And so the way that new technology has affected us, I was thinking, how do we make meaning of it? How do we navigate it? How can we, what's the challenges it poses? And so I chose to look at these two philosophies. I gave a proposal to practice mindful examination or digital lives using Buddhism and existentialism. And so I'm gonna continue to explore these philosophies as I go through the presentation. In this presentation, I'll argue that both existentialism and Buddhism offer viable ways to rationalize the digital existence on social media. I chose existentialism and Buddhism because they both share a commonality of focusing on kind of what the glass half full, the kind of the negative perspective of the way of looking at things. Existentialism is a 20th century philosophical idea that came out of Eastern Europe. It really took a heavy influence after World War II. It focuses on the absurdity of life and kind of the pointlessness of life, such as, you know, we wake up, we go to work, and then go home, and that's our life. And then we die, and that's kind of the gist of it. And that's where I really like when a glass half empty. They really focus in on that. And Buddhism, it's 6th century BC religious idea that focuses on the suffering. Why do we have suffering? Where does the suffering come from? How can we overcome suffering? So I'm going to continue to dive into these ideas as we, you know, go through the presentation. So before I wanted to jump in existentialism and Buddhism, I wanted to talk about what is the digital life. And so the virtual world and the world have merged. You know, as we all are experiencing right now, COVID-19 has really pushed us forward through having a life on social media, online, virtually, like we are right now. You know, we're having everything virtual, and so social media has become a space for people to live a life. Social media is another place in which people live alongside their office life, home life, community life. Miller is actually part of him and 15 other anthropologists went out, you know, different parts of the world to go start doing studies on how does social media impact humanity. So it was really interesting to read, but I'm going to carry on here. So existentialist view on social media, it calls it suffering and absurdity. When individuals seriously consume content from social media, they inherently forfeit their freedom of choice. Users on social media are exhibiting blatant disregard for deep, serious reading and reflective, rational thinking. And then, so that's kind of like where you see people are just scrolling and not trying to interact and engage. They kind of go there for entertainment. They go there for to kind of tune out. And you know, there's a lot of ideas being shared, just like in the real world. People are sharing ideas, talking, communicating. And like if you're just taking someone's word for what it is and not interacting with yourself, you know, that is a choice to do that, but it's not your actual truth. You're kind of just being led into it. It's not something you're not giving yourself the right to live the way you want to. So those who allow society, religion, history, mass culture appear to define them are living inauthentically. They aren't finding who they are. They aren't becoming who they want to be. They're kind of being told what to be, how to be, you know, how to live by, you know, by all these different sources beyond themselves. They're not looking internally to who they want to become. And so some of the absurdity that it's experienced on social media is, you know, FOMO, fear of missing out, temporary respite that leads to procrastination, preparation of themselves to fit into the crowd. So all these kind of suffering, it's pretty much if we get suffering because of the human condition is where we're always trying to make meaning of who we are, what we're doing, and where we're going. And a lot of these kind of dilemmas here, these problems create anxiety in a lot of people. And so people are going into, you know, social media having anxiety all the time. It's like, yeah, why would you want a life of anxiety? That's absurd to have a digital existence, you know, made from anxiety. Suffering is a tragic result of the human condition, or suffering is a consequence when an individual's existence is dependent from sources beyond their authentic selves. The human condition is now being experienced on social media. The existentialist view on how to overcome suffering and absurdity. By accepting the absurdity that the human condition is now experienced on social media, our suffering allows us to make meaning of our digital lives. And so I wanted to look at Albert Camus' Mythicisis. Mythicisis was an ancient Greek mythology where Sisyphus was granted to go back to Earth. He was in the underworld. He was granted to go back to Earth to avenge his death, and he actually stays on Earth to keep living. And the Greek gods weren't having it, so they brought him back down to the underworld, and they had a rock ready for him to push. And so from the underworld, he has to push a rock up this mountain every day for eternity. And so when he's at the top of the mountain, the rock rolls all the way back down. He continues it every day, every day, every day. In Albert Camus' essay, he actually, compares this to how this is the working man's life. It's we wake up, we work, and then that's what we do every day, and then we die. It's like, okay. But what I wanted to bring into this, what Albert Camus for eternity, is now that the virtual world on social media is that's becoming a place that's becoming eternal. It's like once you post it on the internet, it's staying there forever. It's eternal. So what I wanted to really bring in was, if what we're doing on the internet, on social media, that's we're acting like mythicists now. If we're always scrolling, whatever the content, whenever we're engaging on social media, it's becoming eternal. It's staying lasting. Obviously, unless you delete it. But if we don't know when we're gonna die. So if you end up dying, bam, whatever left of your profile is there. That's what it is. It's eternal. So and this is where Alchemy talks about how does Sisyphus make meaning of this? And so what he does, he talks about is that he takes ownership of how he pushes the rock, how he's moving the rock, how the way he pushes it up the mountain. He's like, I control walking back down. That's where he feels a sense of freedom, and that's where he feels accomplished. Like, I chose how to push the rock today. I chose how to live today. And so as we go through social media, we got to choose, okay, since it's becoming so relevant and being pressed onto us by sources beyond us, by technology, evolving technologies, how are we going to engage on social media? How are we going to be interacting with other people? How do you want to experience social media? There's people that okay, so here it is. I'm always scrolling. It's an escape from an acute consciousness that humanity suffers from. And so this was an example from a student that's basically saying that they're admitting to not making meaning of social media, not making meaning, not trying to live authentic. They're not trying to be who they want to be. They're just going through the motion, not making sense of it, not trying to own their reality, not trying to own this life that they live, their digital existence they're experiencing on social media. Social media has expanded our ability to define our authentic selves. How much time did I get? So the Buddhist view on social media calls it suffering. And existence on social media calls it suffering. Buddhism suffering is known as dukkha, and individuals experience dukkha from social media because of their desires. And so students with still developing brains deeply felt desires for approval. One factor that underscores the importance of an audience on social media is desire for feedback. Social media, as I claim, is a desire machine. So we start looking at social media as a place where we're trying to fulfill our desires. This is where the Buddhist view comes in and says, if we squash these, well, if we recognize that there's desires there, and the desires that we have is what brings us suffering, because we're never satisfied. We're never satisfied. We've always had desires. You're never satisfied. You never get fulfillment. You're not having true fulfillment of who you are. It's like an outwards, it's like an external source for looking at who you want to be, who you're looking for, like external affirmation of how to live. And it's like those desires aren't, those desires will bring suffering, causes suffering. So it really causes a person suffering because of their desires they project into their digital life. So that's where the anxiety comes in. That's where you're always looking for likes, always looking for something else, trying to find who you are, when you should be looking internally. And so in the Buddhist view, how to overcome suffering from social media, they look at Dharma, and Dharma is how to live correctly. And so within Dharma, there's the Four Noble Truths. And so the first is life is suffering. Second is suffering is caused by desires, cravings, or thirst. To banish suffering, banish desires, and end suffering by following the Noble Eightfold Path. And so right here, if you recognize that the way to end your suffering is by banishing your desires. And so the Noble Eightfold Path, I'm going to kind of go real quick over it, is kind of generalize the three kind of concepts found in the Noble Eightfold Path, is the perfection of wisdom, perfection of moral conduct, perfection of mental discipline. And so when you look at the wisdom, it's like, okay, how do I present myself? Who do I want to be? How am I interacting with other people? Perfection of moral conduct is, okay, am I cyberbullying? Am I attacking someone? How am I with like how my like what kind of experience am I giving outwards into the digital, so on social media. And the perfection of mental discipline would be are you letting social media become something that is inhibiting from who you want to be? When usually when someone's procrastinating, they usually feel a sense of anxiety because they're doing something here in the real world, and they're not accomplishing, they're not being who they're supposed to be, and so they run away from it. It's like a not want to take ownership. And this is where Buddhism and essential that wants you to take ownership of the glass half empty, of looking at social media glass half empty. And so in Buddhism, nirvana, enlightenment, is that liberates the individual from suffering. I wouldn't say necessarily that you can experience nirvana on a digitally, a digitized nirvana, but when I read, nirvana has very many definitions, and one of them is just you live peacefully. You have at peace. You're not getting anxiety going on social media, checking for likes, checking if someone's responding to you, having all this conflict on the digital space in social media. Social media is an extension of a person where they can act and apply these principles to make meaning of their digital existence. And so one thing I really wanted to focus on is when I talk about existentialism, one of the things I talked about was religion. It says don't let society, religion, and other sources beyond you, impact you. And so when I mentioned Buddhism, that kind of contradicts each other. But one thing I wanted to focus on is that Albert Camus and Satie were both great friends. They both were considered twin geniuses of existentialism, French philosophical movement that pioneered and embodied. They were together. They were best friends, so they were always sharpening each other. So Sartre was considered the father of existentialism, and Sartre actually got his ideas from Shuzo Kuki. He was actually tutoring this Japanese philosopher, and in return, Kuki was actually given, basically showing him how Buddhism works. And one actually barrier that Sartre was having a problem with was nirvana. They couldn't, the Western, like Western Europe, Europe with a lot of Europeans couldn't know how to make sense of nirvana, how to grasp it. And so anyways, Jean-Paul, obviously influenced Albert Camus since they're great friends, but he was deeply influenced by Buddhism and how to make sense of that glass half empty. And so right here, no surprise that a number of certain scholars have analyzed similarities between philosophy and elements of Buddhist thought, where they're trying to make sense of the parts of life that don't make sense, like the suffering, the evils, all these other ideas. But what really comes together is that Buddhism and existentialism both share a care for authentic, a liberated self, a liberated self. So having a digital life on social media, individual experience suffering. The suffering comes from desires or from living inauthentically, not being who you want to be. However, despite our suffering, an individual, we can choose how to overcome our suffering. As a person, we can make meaning of suffering. Therefore, we can make meaning of our digital existence. And one thing I really wanted to point out was, as technology moves forward, we got to learn how to accept it. One of us, Socrates, was actually, he actually feared writing. When writing became something, was a new technology, he was actually scared that it was going to undermine society, but it actually ended up helping. So what I want to really look at is, okay, social media is going to help us. How can we make it help us? How can we work with it to make us a better society, better human being, better person? Like writing a digital existence become more relevant as time marches on. Therefore, people should make meaning of their digital existence. And here's my references.
Awesome, thank you. What a fantastic presentation. Everyone, let's give Josh a hand, honestly. I certainly loved it. Excellent topic, philosophy. So one, we have the commentary form in the chat. Second off, we will now enter our 5-minute, do you mind closing the door? Thank you. We will now enter into our 5-minute live Q&A session. So feel free to either put your questions in the chat or unmic or use the reaction to raise hand. Would anyone like to begin? No?
Hey, this is Strona here. Good job, Josh. That was some pretty heady topics that you were addressing. I have a question for you. As I know, Sisyphus was condemned. He didn't have a chance to say, or an option to say no to pushing the rock back up the hill in the morning when he found it there. Do you think, and as it relates to social media and the absurdity of continually going back to something that causes one suffering, do you think the social media, it's a viable option for someone to say, I'm going to quit going back to Facebook every morning, or waking up and checking my Twitter feed or whatever other social media account is causing the suffering? Do you think that's a viable option to step away from the absurdity now that technology and social media is so intertwined in our lives?
I think you can. I mean, obviously you can take that choice, but that's why I kind of brought up Socrates. It's something that life is absurd, so you gotta learn how to accept it. And if you're not accepting it, then why, you're not, there's another chance for you to make who you want to become. And as technology continues, we have dating apps now. People are finding their significant others. People are finding jobs. People are having full-on lives, and it's like COVID has really pushed that forward through social media. So I think you can embrace it, or you can become like the person who wants to live in a cave and not accept it and try to escape all of it. But I think if we can learn how to work with social media and make meaning of the complicated, the parts that are difficult to maneuver and navigate, I think we can actually use it to our advantage and be more meaningful. And obviously, I think this is why I really wanted to address this kind of topic, because the way it looks like social media is kind of going towards now, that's not a conversation that we're really having. If all the people creating themselves, people using social media for these wrong purposes. And I think if we can start a conversation to start creating dialogue, I think maybe more people will be on board and start seeing, okay, these are the bad parts of social media. How can we start addressing? How can I change myself to address this? So I think you can escape it, but I don't think I think you in the long run might be missing out on an opportunity to really leave a legacy behind. I think social media, your kids can look at it, your kids, because now people are getting memorialized on social media. And someone passes, like, you have something to leave behind. And I think that's something that's valuable to offer for, if you want, your grandkids, your great grandkids, and they can see who you are, who you were, and you can have a chance to be, to live through that.
Thank you so much. Professor Sieber, do you want to go? Or?
Yeah, I really enjoyed your presentation, Joshua. I'm wondering, like, we have all kinds of requirements, both in high school and in college, about certain sets of kind of a liberal arts education, or establishing a foundation of education. Do you think it's time that we come up with requirements in digital media and some sort of at least learning of how to approach it and how to understand it? Because it feels that we have courses in English, and we have courses in math, and we have all these different requirement courses, but it feels like, is this ready to equip them for what you're encountering and what you're experiencing? Does that make sense? Like, yeah, is it time to really think about maybe some sort of educational requirements in these areas?
I think that'd be a great start. I think that, getting people, at least getting aware, and that's what I'm at least trying to do. But I think in the long run, people getting educated in how to approach social media would be beneficial for society in total, and recognizing, okay, like, am I living who I'm supposed to be, or I'm trying to like really impress these other people? When I was doing a lot of these articles I was reading, some of them were sociology, and they talk about being autonomous, and so that kind of lines up with being authentic, or not being authentic, living how you're supposed to be. So I think if we can start that conversation, and if we can really get that in the classroom, that'd be really beneficial for society.
Well, thanks for sharing with this topic with me today, and also thanks to your mentor. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks.
We do have one last question in the chat coming from Brady. And he asks, do you use social media yourself? And if so, how has this project changed your relationship with it?
So I do have a social media account. I actually kind of tapered off of using it because of COVID. I've seen like a lot of negativity being passed around. So I hopped off it and kind of stayed away from it. It's kind of something I've been trying to figure out. So doing this project was pretty much a way for me to try to get back into it, get back involved, and try to figure out how to make sense of all the kind of craziness, all these movements, all these different things. It's like people are pressuring you to do, like they try to use social pressures. I don't like people pressuring me to do things. I like to, come from within. And so what I want to start doing is going back into social media. I'm probably not going to use Facebook or whatnot. I was thinking about using Twitter. My wife said, that's whack, and to use TikTok. So I'm gonna see what TikTok's about. I'm gonna try to get more involved and understand where society's, directing, and kind of use these ideas to be a kind of guidance on how to approach social media.
Right then, thank you so much. So thank you all for, that concludes our second session of today's OMNI. We will be taking a break and return at 12:45. Wonderful job. Let's all give them one last round of applause. I remind everyone that thank you, mentors, as well. I remind everyone that the commentary form is in the chat. And yeah, we hope to see you here for the third session, which will begin at 12:45. Hello, welcome back to our third session of our second day here at OMNI. We'll begin right after we review our community expectations, which are know that this is a safe space meant for learning, practice patience with yourself and others, treat everyone with respect, dignity, and kindness. Again, we encourage you to speak from personal experience, avoid speaking for others or making generalizations. As well as we want to give everyone a chance to speak and not interrupt others while presenting or asking questions. If you disagree with someone, please ask questions to better understand their intent and offer their perspectives and interpretations. So without further ado, let's begin with our first presentation for our third session. Wrong one. So our first presentation is by Austin Quandt. His mentor was Professor Daniel Ante Contreras. This is a pre-recorded presentation with a live Q&A, the title of which is Rain Man, Autism and Stereotypes. This presentation analyzes how the film Rain Man does not accurately portray autism. As well, we have the commentary form in the chat. But without further ado, let's get started with the presentation.
Hello everyone. In this presentation titled Rain Man, Autism and Stereotypes, I will be exploring how films portray individuals with autism. I want to thank Professor Daniel Ante Contreras for his help with this research. In the film Rain Man, which was produced in 1988 by director Barry Levinson, Raymond is an adult who has autism and savant syndrome. Raymond goes on a cross-country trip with his long-lost brother Charlie. Charlie finds Raymond after their father dies and only leaves Raymond inheritance money. Out of frustration, Charlie kidnaps Raymond from his assisted living facility in an attempt to receive some of the inheritance money by negotiating with Raymond's doctor, who controls the funds. Before I begin critiquing the film, I want to acknowledge that Raymond was one of the first films produced that had a main character with a developmental disability. It helped spread awareness of autism, which was a widely unknown disability before this film was released. In that regard, this film made a positive impact on the world. However, since the film introduced autism into society, it also created many of the false stereotypes of the developmental disability that still exist today. In this presentation, I will argue that texts with characters who have autism help create and foster stereotypical views of developmental disabilities. In the film Rain Man, Raymond is portrayed as helpless, a side character, and represents an exclusively white and successful stereotype of autism. To begin with, individuals with autism are commonly portrayed as incapable of completing daily tasks. This stereotype was ignited by Rain Man, as Raymond is consistently getting into trouble, which only his brother can fix. Throughout the film, Raymond is presented as helpless and dependent. During one of the many stops during the road trip, Raymond attempts to go shopping for clothes without his brother's supervision. As Raymond crosses the street, the crosswalk sign changes to read, "Do not walk." Instead of quickly getting to the other side, Raymond freezes in the middle of the road, adhering to the rules of the crosswalk sign. As a result, the car drivers get mad at Raymond, and one driver gets out of their car. Raymond is about to get into a street fight when his brother comes and saves him. Here's a clip of the scene.
You ain't gonna move, I'll move you. Hey, buddy, hey, you're gonna get run over out here. Hey, come on, you're gonna get hurt. Come on. Hey, you hear me? Hey, move it. Hey, no, it's all right, sir. I'm sorry, he's mad at Raymond?
Yeah.
Raymond, come on.
Get
Come on, it's all right.
Gotta get to Kmart. Gotta get to Kmart.
Raymond, come on.
Kmart,
Come on, Raymond.
400 folks to.
Yes.
So said don't walk.
Yes, it's broken.
Said don't walk.
This clip portrays the stereotype that individuals with autism are vulnerable. Autism is a very diverse disability and impacts each individual in a different way. However, in texts such as Rain Man, autistic characters are always portrayed as helpless, helping foster this negative stereotype. In the article Disability and Narrative, author Michael Berube argues that texts with main characters who have a developmental disability attempt to make the character appear vulnerable and helpless. Berube explains that the portrayal of characters with disabilities is designed to create certain emotions within the audience when he writes, "Scholars in disability studies are right to point out that literary representations of people with disabilities often serve to mobilize pity or horror in a moral drama that has nothing to do with the actual experience of disability." In this text, Raymond's helplessness serves as a barrier to accurately representing autism. Raymond being portrayed as vulnerable creates a sense of pity within the viewers, which aids the false idea that society should feel bad for individuals with autism. This representation that characters with autism are dependent is not added into the film in order to portray the disability, but rather to create another dimension of emotion within the viewer through the portrayal of pity for Raymond. Being portrayed as helpless is not only inaccurate, but also creates emotions that help maintain stereotypical views. Furthermore, characters with autism are often built into the plot as the side character. In Rain Man, the plot largely focuses on the perspective of Charlie. It demonstrates the struggles that Charlie has to go through in order to adapt to his new situation. However, it fails to address Raymond's perspective on all the events going on around him, which helps foster the side character stereotype. In the article Punching Up the Story, Disability and Film, author Nicole Marcotic writes that characters with developmental disabilities commonly serve as a side character designed to represent the flaws of the main character. In addition, Marcotic describes how characters with developmental disabilities are viewed as side characters in order to remind the audience of the wholeness of both the main character and the audience themselves. This further aids in negatively signaling out characters with developmental disabilities. Marcotic states that films are able to signal out characters with disabilities through treating them differently when she writes, "These regimes constitute what disability activists call an ableist ideology, one that differentiates bodies by categories of able and less able, visibility and invisibility, handicapped and normal." In Raymond represents his brother's failure to establish long-term relationships with people through Raymond's own failure to connect with people on a personal level. When characters with developmental disabilities are only placed in films for the purpose of symbolizing flaws, they will consistently be viewed as less than the main character. Furthermore, at the end of the film, it is clear that Charlie has grown as an individual through his new gained ability to form more structured relationships with people. However, Raymond displays very little growth throughout the film, which in turn creates the idea that he is a supporting character. The film focuses on and displays the development of Charlie while ignoring Raymond. In addition, this can create a shield of invisibility over Raymond's story. This helps establish a stereotype that individuals with autism cannot undergo personal development or grow from personal experiences. Next, characters with autism are commonly portrayed as successful white men. In Raymond, who is a white man, also gains success through the large amount of money he received from his father's inheritance, which makes him appear wealthy. In addition, Raymond is able to earn a lot of money by continuing counting cards at a casino in Las Vegas, which further allows him to gain an image of success. In the article Autism, Rhetoric, and Whiteness, author Paul Heilicher argues that developmental disabilities, specifically autism, are portrayed as one-dimensional disabilities. A disability which is portrayed as one-dimensional is represented through one specific gender, race, economic status, etc. Heilicher describes how autism is often associated with success due to there being many famous individuals who are thought to have had autism. As Heilicher writes, success is associated with masculine, middle/upper class, and white. In the film Rain Man, this stereotype is never challenged. While Raymond may not be overtly successful, his wealth and large wins at a casino in Las Vegas allow him to achieve this image of success. This in turn helps build a white male identity of autism. In reality, autism is a very diverse disability, unlike the way the film portrays it. This stereotype has an even greater impact on other aspects of society. For instance, healthcare for white individuals with autism is often of higher quality, and white individuals get diagnosed with autism earlier in life than minority individuals with autism. Autistic characters in texts are almost exclusively white and successful. Furthermore, the addition of savant syndrome furthers to this idea of success. Raymond has savant syndrome, which gives him special abilities. In the film, Raymond is able to calculate answers to extremely challenging mathematical questions. In addition, in one scene, a waitress spills a box of toothpicks, and Raymond is able to count how many toothpicks fell out. However, only 10% of autistic individuals have savant syndrome. Many characters with autism in text also have savant syndrome, because success is also commonly associated with intelligence. In the book Representing Autism Culture, Narrative, Fascination, author Stuart Murray explores how autism is illustrated in culture. Murray describes how Raymond created a false narrative that autism and savant syndrome have to be together when he writes, autism is introduced in Raymond as being a condition twinned with savantism, a pairing that has had considerable consequences for the majority of representations of the condition in the years since the film was made. In Raymond's savant syndrome is not treated as another disability, but rather an extension of autism. As a result, the viewers are likely to associate being extremely intelligent as an aspect of autism, not of savant syndrome. In Raymond, the savant syndrome almost fails to exist, but is rather just a part of autism itself. In many other texts, characters with autism are portrayed as having special abilities, which likely means that they have savant syndrome. This failure to address that savant syndrome is not very common in individuals with autism, along with there being no differentiation between autism and savant syndrome, helps foster the stereotype created by Rain Man that all individuals with autism have savant syndrome. Raymond created and maintained stereotypes about individuals with autism. The inaccurate portrayal of autistic individuals through Raymond helps maintain this false idea that individuals with autism are helpless, lack personal growth, and are exclusively white and successful. This stereotyping is dangerous in society as it leads to false and inaccurate images of individuals with developmental disabilities that can impact other aspects of society like healthcare. While Raymond helped bring awareness about autism in society, it also helped introduce many stereotypes about the disability. Here's my works cited page. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Austin. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you for that film analysis. Now we will go, before I forget, there is the commentary form in the chat. And now let us begin our 5-minute live Q&A. So you can feel free to put them in the chat or use a reaction or unmute. Professor Sleeper, see that you have a question.
Yeah, I was wondering, great job. But my question is, are there new shows, new films that do a better job of depicting characters with autism? I was thinking that there was a show, I haven't seen it, but it was called, I think, Dating on the Spectrum or something like that. And it was a Netflix, I believe, show. So is Hollywood or different studios doing characters with disabilities like autism better?
I think that's a good question. From what I'm aware, I've not heard of the show you're speaking of, but I know that there are other shows out there that have been trying to portray autism in a more accurate way. I think still though, there's a lot of shows that don't necessarily do it that well. For example, I haven't watched the show, but in my class that I was doing this research in, we were talking about a show that's called The Good Doctor. And it again portrays individual with autism that has savant syndrome and kind of follows those exact same stereotypes again. So I think that hopefully with just more shows introducing autism, there can be more diversity of the disability out there and more different portrayals of it. But I think just overall, again, I don't really know of any that portray the autism too well, but hopefully there will be soon.
Yeah, in most of the shows I've seen, I think they've always been, white young males. In the more recent ones like Parenthood and so on and so forth. But thank you, Austin, for bringing that to my attention. Thank you.
Oh, any other questions? Well, Austin, my question for you, what led you to have an interest in the subject, and also collaborating using film as a medium to explore that?
Yeah, I think that this subject just really sparked an interest in me. Kind of just understanding that there is there's a lot of different groups in society that aren't necessarily represented that well in films, and I think that autism is one of them that just isn't really talked about that much, just because they're barely represented at all in any films, and when the few times that they are represented, it's just not accurate at all. So I think that really sparked my interest to pursue that subject in this film and this presentation. And then I think I chose the film Rain Man just because I felt like, due to it being one of the first films to really portray autism, it also helped create and foster many of the stereotypes we see today in society. So there was kind of like a double-edged sword by introducing it into society, but also introducing many stereotypes.
Awesome, thank you. John Siebelink, you have a question?
Yes, great work, Austin. What did you find to be the most challenging part of this particular research?
I think probably trying to find sources to sort of create my claim around, just because there's not much research around autism in film specifically. So I think I had to kind of spend a lot of hours just trying to find research papers that matched what I was talking about. And there's not a lot out there, but hopefully, again, there will be more research into autism and how it's portrayed in media. And hopefully that will also spark other people's interest in the subject.
I think you did a great job expanding on that literature.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for this presentation. I think it's a hugely under-discussed conversation. And I worked in the field of developmental disabilities for several years, and especially, right, this idea that it's like the white male, is always the example of the person with autism, and how often it gets missed in girls especially is super interesting. And so, yeah, anyways, thank you so much for bringing this to light. Really appreciated your presentation.
Right then, thank you so much, Austin. Again, wonderful presentation. A round of applause. Thank you. Our next presentation, hold on, let me navigate this. Our next presentation is by John Siebelink. Yes, by John Siebelink. His mentor was Professor Jacob Strona. It is Jacob Strona. This is a live presentation with a 5-minute live Q&A titled "Redefining the Mission: Working with Student Veteran Writers in a College Composition Classroom." This is a redefining of the idea of the student veteran and an examination of some of the challenges unique to students who are military and veterans, who are military veterans. So, John, can you share your screen?
Yes, let me share my screen.
Awesome. And whenever you're ready, sir.
Thank you. Excellent. Is everybody able to see my screen in the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. I want to thank you all first and foremost for being here today, and thank you, Hugo, for that wonderful introduction. Like he said, my name is John Siebelink, and today's presentation is Redefining the Mission, Working with Student Veteran Writers in the College Composition Classroom. I want to start by providing just a tiny bit of background and context as to how I got into this research and how it affects me as both a researcher and a student. I started at MiraCosta College last fall, and one of the very first classes that I enrolled in was a section of English 100 taught by Professor Strona, which was geared specifically towards military veterans. I figured that as a Marine Corps veteran myself and as an English major returning to college after so many years, that this would be an ideal fit for me to fulfill that requirement. Successfully passed that class, and in the summer of 2021, after I was hired by the Writing Center here at MiraCosta, I requested and was accepted for an embedded writing consultant position in his upcoming and current English 100 class for veterans, giving me the opportunity to really work hands-on with other veteran writers, share my experiences as both a veteran and a former student in the class, and also giving me the opportunity to learn from their own unique experiences, which may be very different from my own. And it's from this experience that, as a writing consultant working with student veterans in the English 100 class, the college composition class, that formed the basis of my research, because I realized that there is some ambiguity in the term student veteran, and there's also some unique challenges that face student veteran writers that kept popping up. And so I decided to dig a little more into that. And through that research, I intend to do the following. I intend to redefine the term student veteran, because the current definition is not as diverse as I feel it should be. It is not as inclusive as it should be. And I do not think that it accurately reflects the community of student veterans across higher education. And I also want to identify and address some specific concerns that student veterans face as writers in the writing classroom, specifically issues of community and comfort, which are not necessarily exclusive to student veterans, but they are very prevalent. And I intend to show how these issues can be overcome in the writing classroom based on some actual examples that we do in the classroom. All right. If you ask the common person on the street what a veteran is, more often than not, you're going to hear something along the lines of somebody who served in the military, you know, the past tense, emphasis on the past tense. When I enrolled in my own English 100 course for veterans last fall and saw that it was geared towards veterans, I assumed that it would be a class made up of people just like me, prior service members who had been out of the military for quite some time. The reality was actually quite different, and quite the opposite. My class certainly had a lot of veterans who were out of the military for a while, but we also had an even greater number of recently separated veterans within the last couple of years or so. A lot of active duty service members who are still in the military, a lot of reservists, as well as others who are kind of stuck in that limbo of being discharged, who are transitioning from military to the civilian life. The section that I'm currently assigned to as a writing consultant has a makeup that is very, very similar to that, a wide variety of different kinds of military affiliated students. So working and being a student in Professor Strona's class was my first clue that the term student veteran was far more diverse than I originally believed, because going into the class, I also had the idea that student veteran meant that students who used to be in the military, not necessarily, you know, were still involved in the military in some capacity. When I went to do actual academic research into the notions of the student veteran and student veteran writers in particular, I found that higher education community is kind of split when it comes to defining just what a student veteran is. Talking with members of different veteran student organizations, both here at MiraCosta and at some of the other colleges that I've attended in the past, including MiraCosta's, informed me that anyone of any military affiliation, or sometimes lack thereof, were permitted to be part of those student organizations. They didn't just have to be formerly serving military members. And often the veteran services offices at MiraCosta and several other colleges work to support all military students, whether they be veteran, active duty, reservists, spouses, or whatnot. So from a very practical standpoint, the student veteran composed far more than just people who used to serve. But when I was reading over a dozen academic articles that talked about student veterans in various capacities, including the writing classroom, one thing that really stuck out to me was they all seem to work under that common definition that I just said. They all seem to define and work with students who used to be serving in the military and treated active duty members, reservists, and others as a different demographic. And that, to me, did not seem to really be realistic. There obviously seems to be a big disconnect between what the practical side of academia considers to be student veterans and what the theoretical side considers to be student veterans. And the fact of the matter is that based on my personal experience, both as a student and as a writing consultant working in a classroom made up completely of student veterans, the reality is that this kind of class and the college community make up a wide spectrum of military affiliated students, and that the professional academic consideration of the student veteran is not diverse enough to accurately represent the reality of what student veterans encompass. So for the sake of diversity and to ensure that student veterans accurately reflect the reality that they're living in, I propose that the term student veteran be redefined to allow for the inclusion of all military affiliated students, even if it means doing away with the term entirely and replacing it with something along the lines of military affiliated students as opposed to student veterans, because not all student veterans are formerly serving military members. Some of them are still in, and I feel like that needs to be taken into consideration with the terminology. One of the biggest issues that student veterans or military affiliated students, if you will, face is the lack of a sense of community. And I think that this is probably one of the biggest concerns that face the military community. Much like MiraCosta College, the United States military is a community within communities, and all servicemen and women bond in their shared sense of honor, service, commitment, and sacrifice. When one is discharged or otherwise distanced from the military world and placed in a college setting where the vast majority of the students and faculty populations have never served a single day in the military, those sort of commonalities are lost. Students, especially student veterans, who do not feel a sense of community run a greater risk of feeling, isolated, out of place, and a host of other emotions that can jeopardize their performance in the classroom and put their entire academic careers on the line. It is imperative that a sense of community be instilled in student veterans at the campus level in order to increase rates of success and retention. One thing that I am trying to help with in the class that I'm working in involves creating various levels of community within the classroom setting. Students on day one are reminded by the professor that they are in a class surrounded by their military peers, which assures the student vets that they are not alone and that there are others around them who have been or are still in their shoes. From there, they are united in their common role as students in an English 100 class taught by Professor Jacob Strona. While not a veteran himself, he identifies himself to the class as the content expert who they can trust to teach them all that they need to know about their English 100 material in order to be successful. Once this trust is established, there exists a community of students who are not only student veterans, but writing students of a professional and experienced instructor who has pledged himself to their education. While not always feasible, having an embedded writing consultant such as myself, who is both a veteran and a former student of the same class that they are taking, can be key to fostering that same sense of community outside of the classroom. The writing consultant, beyond assisting with tutoring and mentoring students on their homework assignments, can be the bridge that breaks the student vet out of their comfort zones and into parts of the college they otherwise may not go. For instance, encouraging and nudging the student veterans to visit the Writing Center outside of my office hours allows them the opportunity to not only explore a Pacific part of campus, even virtually because of the pandemic, but it also gets them to work with other Writing Center consultants and coaches, many of whom have far more training and experience than I do. This instills another level of trust between the student veteran and the college. And from that trust, another community is born. And by this point, the student veterans community has expanded into the greater college community, and the veteran knows that he or she has access to resources and aids that they can trust to assist them if they are needed. The students' chances of success have increased dramatically. And another common factor that keeps popping up, and one that has been very near and dear to my heart from a personal level, is that of comfort, both as students and as writers. For many veterans, the only writing that they may have done after high school, besides filling out forms and reports, were letters home during boot camp. Academic writing is a foreign concept not present in any form in the military outside of advanced education. For older veterans, the longer it has been since their last bit of traditional education, the less they can recall, which puts their comfort levels at a major disadvantage when they enter the college composition classroom. Further compounding this is the lack of confidence many veterans feel as new students. Unfortunately, the military by and large still fosters an atmosphere that is very macho and where academic brainy types are ridiculed and where manual labor jobs and duties are more often than not, do not receive the respect that they can. Being put in a position where academic learning and thinking is not at the forefront, is being encouraged in the classroom, can work to rattle the nerves of even the most experienced veteran who is not accustomed to the academic environment. And as always, a lot of times there exists the horrifying and traumatic experiences common to many veterans, and these can make them uncomfortable opening up about personal things, which is of course crucial to being a writer, even in an academic setting. So one of the big ways that we've been working to overcome some of these levels of discomfort inside the writing classroom is to help students not only feel more at ease in class, to use a military term, but also clear up some of the misconceptions that they might have about the class or their role in it. Students are formed very early on by the instructor that although it is a section of English 100 comprised solely of veterans, it is still a normal section of English 100. They will be completing the same types of assignments as non-veteran students and will be held to the same kind of academic standards that any student will be held to. This works in a way to show the student veterans that their instructor has the utmost faith in them and their potential to succeed in class despite their unique background and experiences that other students might not have. This in turn helps boost the student vet's confidence and helps them know that they do belong in class and that they do have what it takes to be a college student. This also ties directly into the course material that student veterans must complete. As I said, these students are being held to the same kind of standards as any English 100 student. The assignments they complete and the papers that they are assigned are typical English 100 papers. Veterans might go into the class expecting to write only about military subjects, but instead they find themselves writing things like rhetorical analyses, definition essays, and film studies, all of which contain heavy critical thinking components. What the instructor does is he creates a sort of backdrop for the student veterans where, while the assignments themselves might not tie directly into their military service, the students are also not forced to pull from anything they do not feel comfortable pulling from. Non-military related assignments prevents them from being pulled forced to relive anything that might negatively affect them or bring up trauma, but also allows the student veteran to be in control of just how much of their military experience they draw upon when they complete their assignments. The ball is totally being left in their court. As a writing consultant, what I can do in my job is to ensure to students that I treat them no differently than any other students. I can remain professional when I work with them and keep the focus of our conversations during a tutoring session on whatever individual writing concerns a student veteran writer might have regarding their writing, and keep my purpose as the process expert front and foremost when working with these students. Keeping their minds focused on the task at hand and on their mission helps them not only build their skills as writers, but it also helps them feel comfortable in their minds. Again, their status as students will be emphasized and they will be able to feel more at home at school and in the classroom, respected and valued for the people that they are instead of simply being seen as veterans, which is a sentiment that I myself have felt before many times in college. So in conclusion, as we have seen, the currently accepted definition of a student veteran as being one who has simply served in the military in the past does not accurately reflect reality. What is needed is a new definition that incorporates all military affiliated students, because this is the actual reality that the students live in and what we all live in. And this defines student veterans not only at the MiraCosta College, but all across higher education. It is also very important that we all continue fostering a deep sense of community within our student veterans and nurture their feelings of comfort, both as students and as writers. Both are tied directly into student success. So ensuring that we continue working with our student veteran writers and helping to build their confidence is paramount to their future academic success. I want to take a quick moment to thank the many individuals, some who are present today, who have helped make this research possible. This is very near and dear to my heart, and I do not think I would have been able to do this without them. So first and foremost, I want to thank my former professor and current faculty mentor, Professor Strona, who has continued to support me over the last 2 years in various research projects. His colleague in the letters department, Dr. Daniel Contreras, has also been my faculty mentor for many of these OMNI presentations and has also given me some good non-veteran insight into this current project. I want to thank my supervisors, Ann and Denise in the Writing Center, as well as the rest of the team for all of their insight and support from a Writing Center perspective. I want to thank Professor Sleeper, Elizabeth, and all the rest of the honors navigators for all of their support and for making this event possible. And most important of all, I want to thank the student veterans of MiraCosta College and the veterans and active duty personnel everywhere, because without them and their sacrifice, it is likely that none of us would be able to be presenting today or be present for today's event. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Honestly, wonderful. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you. Such a great presentation. We will. I remind the audience that the commentary intake form is in the chat. I can send that out right now. And we will now go into our live Q&A. So anyone have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or use your icon, to, raise your hand icon, or just unmute. Any questions to begin?
I just want to say I apologize for going over. I could not see the chat while I had my PowerPoint up.
No worries, no worries. It was such a captivating presentation. I blame myself as well for being so immersed.
Thank you.
Hey, John, Strona here. Can you talk about some of the successes that you've had working with some of the student veterans?
Most definitely. Tying kind of into the comfort and the confidence building. Towards the end, it's taken most of the semester, Professor, but I have started having more of the students be more willing to share some of their work. More of them have started visiting the Writing Center. So I definitely sense that there's some definite confidence building going on. And I think a lot of them are starting to be more comfortable with their writing. You definitely see the writing improve. So staying focused on the writing and better understanding the assignments is helping people better communicate their ideas in writing. So it's a lot of little things like that. I definitely think that confidence building is key. And that's something that we really strive for in the Writing Center. So I see it as a double success, both inside the classroom and fulfilling the Writing Center goals as well.
Thank you for that question. Thank you for that answer. Anyone else? Professor Sleeper, do you have a question?
Yeah, great job, John. It's always nice to see you.
Thank you.
One of the questions I had is that, have you done any more research into our other schools replicating these types of programs and resources, and especially if they do exist, are they existing at our transfer schools? So say, for instance, a student that's enjoying these types of communities would be able to find these types of services and resources and personnel. That's the key part, personnel in their transfer destinations.
I have attempted to do that research. I've reached out to the departments at Palomar, San Diego Mesa College, and some of the other local community colleges. And I don't know if it's just because of the pandemic or because of just how far into the semester I sent those messages out. I've not gotten a single response, so I'm not 100% sure of what's going on. Somebody told me that Palomar offers a similar kind of class, but I can't be 100% certain about that. And that was actually something that I was actually looking to do for future research, was to see how this sort of class and how this sort of definition can be, because I focus this part mostly on the community college level, but I want to see how that can transfer over to the university level and how, you know, the university freshman writing classes might compare to the current one that I described. So there's still a lot of research to be involved, and I've not been ignorant to those possibilities. So I'm really looking forward to see what future research has in store for that.
Well, thank you, John. Always great to hear from you. And also nice to see Jacob as well. Always nice to see the mentors here.
Thank you, Professor Sleeper, and thank you, John. Professor Lambert, I believe you had a question?
Yes, I did. Yes. Thank you very much. This is an excellent presentation. I'm curious, since many of our courses across the disciplines also have writing components, if there are some characteristics of the English class that you'd like to see transferred over to other disciplines to continue fostering that sense of community among, and I'm going to adopt your term from now on, military affiliated students.
Oh, thank you. Well, most definitely, you hit the nail on the head there. I think that obviously the English 100 class is a very writing heavy course, but that doesn't mean that other non-English disciplines are not that way. Myself, I'm preparing for the writing intensive Anthropology 101 with Professor Miller next semester. So I know that's one outside of my discipline that has a lot of writing involved. And I just think some of the same ideas of just having the student veterans, or any student for that matter, just really focus on the course material and focus on the assignment material and the prompts. I think, I mean, while it's important to maintain one sense of community and one sense of identity, veterans seeing themselves as veterans, LGBTQ community seeing themselves as part of that community, I feel like one of the best ways of diversifying everything and really building a strong sense of community across the different smaller communities is just staying focused. So really fostering an idea that you're focused on what you need to get done in that particular class. So an anthropology class focusing heavily on the anthropology, biology focusing on biology, math focusing on math. I feel like really getting it into the students' heads that they're students here at MiraCosta first and foremost. That's why I tell my fellow members of PTK all the time, reminding them that they're students first and foremost, and that they're students in a particular class, I think could help overcome a lot of those hurdles, if that makes sense. Part of the title of my presentation, redefining the mission, I think being mission oriented, I think with all of these classes, I think is something I would like to see a lot more of.
Thank
I
you.
hope that answers your question.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for those questions. Excellent Q&A. We will now be moving into our third presentation by Ryan Madjidi. His mentor was Professor Luke Lambert. This is a live presentation with a live Q&A, the title of which is Technology's Impact on Wall Street and the Financial Industry. I remind everyone as well that the commentary form is in the chat. And Ryan, do you have access to share your screen?
Yes, I do.
Excellent. Whenever you're ready, sir.
All right. Is the slides in full screen? I'm not sure.
Yes, on my side it is. I see it.
So hello, my name is Ryan Madjidi. For my honors project, I examined technology's impact on Wall Street and the financial industry. And I would just like to begin by saying a huge thanks to my professor, Luke Lambert. He really helped me, through my first OMNI presentation and project and honors course at Miracosta, guided me and helped me through the whole thing. So my presentation will be divided into 4 parts. First will be an overview, and then next is about the impacts technology has had on the industry. Then I'll talk about the future and continued innovation in the sector. And then finally, I will conclude with the main message and implications this topic has. So this quote is by Stuart Brand, who's famous for his creation of the Whole Earth catalog. And so the quote reads, "Once a new technology rolls over you, if you're not part of the steamroller, you're part of the road." So begin with the overview. So what is artificial intelligence? Well, it is defined as computing systems which perform tasks normally conducted by human decision-making. So as you can see, it has many applications in our world and in many areas of our society. And this picture on the right just kind of shows you all the different places it's in use. So one of the most common interactions we have with artificial intelligence is Google search recommendations, right? So the screenshot here shows how by typing SANF, the search engine predicts what you are looking for, and this feature saves the extra time and hassle of typing out your full search. So it gives you 10 recommendations that it predicts what you want to type. So $5 trillion. This is the average amount of currency that is traded in the stock market daily. It is an eye-opening amount, and it's interesting to see how all of this is processed efficiently. So back in 1985, there were many technological hurdles yet to get over. With all the fees and complex systems, market involvement was expensive and tricky. Fast forward 30 years, and the financial market has suddenly become easy and widely accessible for all demographics. The year 2015 here represents Robinhood's launch of its zero commission mobile trading app. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Robinhood and how easy and interactive the platform is. And this is just kind of on the right, the GIF of walking through its app. So it's not always a bullish market. On October 19th, 1987, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell over 22%. This marked Wall Street's greatest percentage loss in a single day. Economic worries led to massive amounts of sell orders, which led to massive amounts of brokers who just could not keep up with the volume and sent the market plunging. So after this day of panic, new laws and formalities were actually created to allow small size orders to be processed automatically. This day of fear actually sparked the beginning for many innovations in the financial industry today. Now let's look at some ways technology has influenced the financial industry. So first is job declines. So technological advancements and the COVID-19 pandemic have accelerated the loss of jobs in the financial sector. So the chart on the right represents the decline in new jobs available at the 12 leading investment banks over the past 10 years. And as you can see, it's a steady decline since 2010 to 2019, 2020. So big institutions have replaced humans with automated systems. This is because it is cheaper and more efficient to run an automatic program rather than hiring multiple people to conduct repetitive tasks. When it comes to trading, a robot is better because it is purely objective and doesn't have emotional attachments like a human does. So this is a picture, I believe, from January of 2021, this past year. So you can just see the big difference, like the floor of the New York Stock Exchange has from like 30 years ago. Some positive impacts of technology are the benefits of investing. So there is open access to company information, investing ideas, and advice, all available through the internet. As we previously went over, the majority of buy and sell orders are now processed automatically and are hassle-free. The main idea here is that the average person has a vast selection of tools that can be used to gain insight and find possible opportunities that no longer were available, that not long ago were not available or had a large barrier to entry. So it's all about like the power to the individual. Let's look at the direction now the financial industry is headed, specifically ways people and companies are adjusting to technological changes. So there will be ongoing improvements and innovation in trading platforms. With continued advancements in technology, the user experience will only get better from here. Artificial intelligence and machine learning will also become increasingly dominant in the industry. They continue to take over repetitive tasks and lead to further job contraction, unfortunately. And of course, more adoption of new technologies will lead to more data and information available. So more trends that continue to persist are work from home offices, especially during the COVID-19 restrictions. Companies were basically forced to switch to this alternative working environment, and it is here to stay and grow, actually. Another recurring theme in the financial space is the increase of retail and average trading. Greater opportunities and interests will continue to expand this market. So this graph represents the amount of digital wallets per year. So to clarify, the numbers on the right are in billions. As you can see, the number of mobile wallets, are rapidly growing. And this is impactful to the future of the financial industry because these types of accounts allow money to flow quickly and with ease through the internet and platforms. So you can see back in 2010, it was next to zero almost, and fast forward 10 years, already at 1 billion. The future for the financial industry will not be problem-free, however. One of the biggest challenges is going to be cyber and ransomware attacks. These criminal actions steal personal information and cost the US billions of dollars annually. Dealing with the attacks will be an extremely difficult task, but must be prioritized to protect the public from excessive damages. So lastly, I would like to go over the key messages of my research. So to conclude, using new technologies can provide you with greater access to information. However, remaining vigilant with the platforms you interact with is crucial to successfully navigate through this complex market. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for that presentation, Ryan. Everyone, let's give him a hand. Thank you for that. We will now be entering into our live 5-minute Q&A, and we have one question ready from John Siebelink. John, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Congratulations, Ryan, on your presentation and excellent job. I was curious what inspired this particular line of thinking, like what got you into wanting to do this research?
That's a great question. So I'm actually studying economics in Miracosta right now. So it kind of ties in with my major and like my interest around the stock market as well. So I would like to the reason I picked this was just to, grow my mind around the area and get more like information and like learn about more of the history of the industry and whatnot.
If I could ask a quick follow-up question, Hugo, is this research you're planning on continuing into the future and doing more with?
I think so. Yeah, I think I continue to read probably like books and articles that kind of tie in with this topic and provide me more insight and information to help me with my future and my major, of course.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions? I do have a question. How do you think if you can address this, how do you think the pandemic has affected the introduction of AI into production or into the economy?
Yeah. So, sorry.
If you did research that is, I don't mean to intimidate.
No, I mean, with everyone working from home, everything had to become, faster and all through the internet and through our computers, basically. So, plenty of companies accelerated their use of that technology of artificial intelligence into their platforms and their companies, and people definitely are taking advantage of that features, whether it's their own job or like trading, for instance, more tools and ways to look at things, new perspectives.
Thank you. We have time for more questions. Anyone have any more questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or just unmute yourself.
I have one more if nobody else has one. This will be the same question I asked Austin Ryan, but what did you find most challenging about this research, if anything?
I think the most challenging part was like organizing my information in a way that kind of made sense and providing enough explanation and details for each part and just organizing the whole project.
All right. Any more questions, or are we so far so good? All right. Well, that concludes our Q&A. Again, give him a hand. And also, we will be. This marks the end of our third session for our second day here at OMNI. Again, the commentary form is in the chat. We will be we'll be ending now at 1:45 and we'll be returning at 1:55. So thank you for coming. We hope you'll join us in a few minutes. All right, hello, welcome back to our second day of OMNI. This is our fourth session. We have 3 presentations lined up. And before we start, I just want to take a minute to review our community expectations. Number 1, know that this is a safe space meant for learning. 2, practice patience with yourself and others. Treat everyone with respect, dignity, and kindness. Speak from personal experience and avoid speaking for others and making generalizations. Number 4, give everyone a chance to speak and don't interrupt others. And 5, if you disagree with someone, ask questions to understand their intent or offer alternate interpretations. Without further ado, our first presenter is Dan Murroni. His mentor was Professor Christopher Sleeper. And yes, Professor Sleeper. This is a pre-recorded presentation with a live Q&A, the title of which is Resilience of the Reef, a history of the environmental and biological impacts of French colonization in I hope I'm saying this right, Maui Nui or French Polynesia.
Tower in a lagoon turns the sky white at the moment of detonation. The device is described as one of tactical range, or smaller than a major atomic bomb. The French insisted there would be no danger of radiation increase. The awesome mushroom cloud is observed closely by both military and civilian French personnel. America and Britain deplored the blast. There was no comment from Moscow.
Before there was a French Polynesia, there was and remains Maui Nui, 118 islands speckling a vast but vibrant expanse of coral reefs, undersea mountains, and open ocean that extends to nearly 1 million square miles. As they masterfully navigated eastward from Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa aboard voyaging canoes, the Polynesians came to inhabit Maui Nui throughout the start of the 2nd millennium. The immense geography of the Pacific then contributed to a slow and centuries-long process in which the Europeans gradually encountered the Polynesians and others. Having experienced centuries of relative shelter from outsiders, Maui Nui began rapidly transforming into an experimental sandbox for merchants, missionaries, and settlers by the beginning of the 19th century. Catholics and Protestants vied for religious dominance as foreign sailors introduced deadly diseases. All the while, Maui Nui was not spared from the geopolitical bickering of European nations. Eventually, all of Maui Nui became an overseas French territory as the world teetered into a tumultuous 20th century. Today, the islands remain a colony of France. Thus, the story of French colonization in Maui Nui is a modern one that continues to be written. But in just under 200 years, the impact of France's colonization has extended beyond the erasure of Maui cultural identity, customs, and the Maui language. The islands and their people have also endured the severe repercussions of biological and environmental carelessness. Most insidiously, the effects of nuclear fallout and contamination resulting from decades of nuclear weapons testing.
We have seen banners in the atolls, and it was written in red, in big color. This zone is very contaminated. Don't fish here anymore. And we have seen all that signs everywhere. And that was the time I started to say, oh, what you doing here? They are contaminating your country.
France's first nuclear test in the Pacific officially occurred at the Mururoa Atoll on July 2, 1966. There is a common misconception that the open-air testing of nuclear weapons has solely existed as a mid-century phenomenon. While the United States ceased their Pacific testing of nuclear weapons in 1963, French testing in Maohinui continued for 3 decades. The last nuclear detonation was at the Fanga-Tuufa Atoll in 1996. In total, France detonated 193 nuclear explosions. 46 of them between 1966 and 1974 were environmentally devastating bombs that exploded in the atmosphere. In 1974, a French miscalculation during the 58th test resulted in sending a radioactive cloud towards the heavily populated island of Tahiti. Heavy precipitation drenched the entire island in radioactive rain that seeped into the earth. The consequences of this disastrous event were not fully known until recently, as the true extent to which these tests have affected the environment and people of Maohinui continues to be studied and analyzed. And in view of the 1985 bombing of the Greenpeace vessel Rainbow Warrior by French intelligence, as well as the subversion of nuclear-free and independent Pacific activities, one might easily believe that France would indeed go to great lengths to deny their wrongdoings.
Most people call this place French Polynesia. What do you call it?
Oh, this is French occupied Polynesia. That is the truth. This country has been occupied. There has been war between our ancestors.
Considering how these biological and environmental crises have gravely impacted Maohinui while under the colonial rule of France, it is important to ponder how this history and current Pacific-wide events might influence contemporary Maohi-French relations moving forward. When neighboring island states such as Kiribati and Tonga remain independent, as Maori leaders seek to formally rename New Zealand to Aotearoa, where Hawaii sees a renewed push for sovereignty in the wake of U.S. military-caused eco-disasters, and as France faces an upcoming independence referendum in New Caledonia, will the people of Maohinui seek to relinquish themselves from French colonial supervision? No matter the eventuality, however, the Maohi will undoubtedly persist as they have for centuries, such as the hardened reefs that surround the atolls, or as the living marine corals that regenerate into beautiful structures. There exists a resilience and determination by the Maohi to outlast colonialism in the Pacific. Te Atuahere, a talented Maohi poet of our current age, writes, "As long as they are here, as long as they occupy our land, exploit our resources, commodify our culture, as long as they try to disappear us, we will fight. We will sing, we will dance, we will blow our pu, and welcome the Atua. When I speak of colonization, I speak of something that will end."
Beautiful presentation, Dan. Let's give him a round of applause. Really a magnificent work of art and research. Again, the commentary form can be found in the chat, and we will now begin our live Q&A for 5 minutes. Any questions, feel free to unmute or to put them in the chat or raise your hand with the icon. Any questions? Professor Sleeper.
Hey, Dan, great always to work with you. You know, do you see in the next 5 to 10 years, the peoples of this region having success in gaining independence or putting enough political pressure through perhaps the United Nations or other mechanisms to be able to declare their independence? I've been paying attention to some stories down in the Caribbean with Barbados and how they were able to gain some independence. Do you see something similar like that happening in the near future?
Yes, I do. And I think what it comes down to is New Caledonia, especially because it's a French territory. And that's coming up in the next couple of months. There's some drama related to it going on. But I think that once that happens, you'll kind of see like a domino effect. And you're right, as in the Caribbean, there's also similar movements happening. So I think we're going to see a lot of this in the next even year. So definitely 5 to 10 years.
Of course, that probably doesn't undo a lot of the ecological damage caused by nuclear weapons, though.
Right, and that's another thing. I think with climate change and that affecting the Pacific, and Pacific voices are having more of a say on the global stage, that's also another opportunity to kind of put that independent movement in there. And as you can see, the nuclear-free movement was also heavily intertwined with the independence movements.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, I have one for you. Sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand. So I was wondering, do you see any parallels to the French occupation of Polynesia and maybe American occupation in like Guam, Samoa, or like the Virgin Islands, in any way that maybe the US can model better occupancy or kind of stepping away from the occupations?
I mean, in my truthful opinion, I believe that the only proper way is to give independence to these territories. I don't think that there's a proper way of handling it, because ultimately the United States and France are colonial and imperial powers. And as we see in Hawaii, the military is still trying to deny these environmental disasters. So as far as behaviors, I really don't think it's going to change, and it's only going to take the push by Pacific people to achieve these goals.
Yes, any other questions? If not, I do have a question. Are there any policies, or are there any types of movements in France itself, European France itself, to call for independence or to call for a better treatment of Polynesia?
Yes, and this is something that's been historical as well, especially where Vietnam was concerned and where Algeria was concerned. There were movements, especially youth in France, that were protesting against the government. And you see a lot of that in France, actually. There's definitely a lot of political activism.
Awesome, thank you. We have time for a few more questions. Anyone else have any more questions? If not, oh, John, yes, go ahead.
I'll go ahead and ask my famous question that I've been asking the 2 previous ones in the last session. But what did you find to be most challenging or most difficult about your research into this?
I would say that just simplifying all of this information. I mean, I wish that I could create a 2-hour documentary on this, because there's so much. I mean, I would love to talk more about these movements, these independence movements, and the reaction to the French nuclear testing. So this was just a little explanation of the French testing itself. But yes, there's a lot going on there, and I think there's a lot of information that people don't know about. I'd just like to put out that France's last nuclear test was in 1996. A lot of people think that, this nuclear testing was just something that occurred in the 60s, but it's very recent and the effects are still being felt.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Right.
And,
Oh, do you want to address that question, Dan?
yeah, I'll take that.
Right.
There's definitely a huge connection there. And what I'm seeing is that people in Maui and Guam and Hawaii are all looking at these events and saying, okay, this is what's happening. Here's an example. We need to do something about it. So I would definitely keep an eye on what's going on in Hawaii as well, because I feel like that's another thing that people may not know what's going on right now. And water is very sacred to the Pacific people, and so is the environment. So everything is linked.
Right then, thank you. We will now move on to our second presentation. Our second presentation is by Sofia Nawaz. Her mentor was Dr. Robert Bond. This is a pre-recorded presentation with a 5-minute live Q&A titled Elites, Food, and the Morals in Between. This presentation analyzes the morals and interaction between the Qing Chinese and Mughal Indian elites through the lens of food.
Elites, Food, and All the Morals in Between, presented by Sofia Nawaz. Introduction. Elites in the Mughal and Qing empires enjoyed a rather specific diet. For instance, Emperor Akbar had rosewater infused in his vegetables, and Emperor Kangxi only ate cooked foods delivered by upper-class members. Many historians have looked over both distinguished meals and nobles in these empires. However, one missing link common amongst historical research is the proposed intentions and morals within these civilizations. What morals can be revealed of the Qing and Mughal elites through the lens of food? In my research, I have been able to deduct the missing link between intentions and food, as far as the Mughal and Qing elites go. The intentions and morals I will be discussing regard the reasoning behind why they acted a specific way. By analyzing the cuisine of the Mughal Empire from 1556 to 1605 and the Qing Empire from 1636 to 1722, I have concluded that both of the empire's elites acted out of vanity. However, Mughals did this through inclusive charitable acts, while the Qing performed exclusive grandiose acts. The Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire, with all its tolerance, still held many social hierarchies depending on religion. The Mughal Empire dates back to 1526 with its founder Babur. However, the more widely known emperor is Akbar. Under Akbar's rule from 1556 to 1605, the empire expanded tremendously, ultimately covering modern-day northern India. In Akbar's empire, Akbar was considered the most elite member, followed by his court officials and imams, those who led Islamic prayers. Merchants and peasants were much further down the social chain. However, for the Hindu religion, the caste system determined elite status. While Akbar was still on top socially, Brahmins, Hindu priests, and Kshatriyas, Hindu warriors, followed. Similarly, merchants and peasants came next, but were referred to as Vaishyas and Sudras. Akbar reorganized the government and financial system to be more centralized and even included non-Muslims in his administration. By showcasing religious tolerance for all, whether it be Hindus, Jains, Sikhs, or Zoroastrians, he soon was approved of by the public. Additionally, Mughal culture has been well recorded in part due to Akbar's patronage of the arts. Mughal food culture. Regardless of elitism, Mughal food culture is consistent for both elites and non-elites. For instance, both Mughal elites and non-elites had similar ingredients embedded in their diets. Rice was a major staple in everyday life, often paired with broths, meats, and vegetables. A dry bread was also typically added on the side. These foods took an especially long time to prepare, some of them as long as the night prior. As for simpler foods like fruits and nuts, the Mughal people enjoyed a vast array of fresh or dried apricots, melons, and apples, along with cashews and almonds. Mughal diets were also varied in respect to religion. The Muslim religion allowed for the consumption of beef, mutton, and poultry, but not pork or shellfish. On the other hand, most Hindus were vegetarian and considered beef to be sacred. In this sense, Hindus also established ascetic norms towards food. Both the Kama Sutra and the Dhammastra Two ancient texts regarded as the code of conduct and guidelines for Hindus discuss the temptation behind gluttony. Due to this difference, chicken and lamb were served at dinner parties, but vegetarian dishes were primarily served. While Hindus did approach food with austerity by avoiding meats and overconsumption, both Hindus and Muslims indulged in food for medicinal and spiritual purposes. Ayurvedic and Unani are the Hindu and Muslim natural medicinal systems. They categorize the human body into three parts with food that healed each category. Consuming food for a specific category was said to help with balancing and centering and could affect personality and emotions as well. Medicinally inspired food consumption was seen as an average part of healthy life in Mughal times. With that in mind, there were major differences to be noted in the actual meals of the elites and non-elites. Meals in the Mughal Empire. Even though traditions stay consistent, the meals in Mughal India were highly determined by status. Elite members had the luxury of balancing simple and grand meals. For example, Islam Khan Chisti, a general during the 1610s, preferred to eat simpler meals of jowar and bajra, bread and millets, sag, vegetables or spinach, and bhat, dry rice. Emperor Akbar also did this and was often seen eating meals privately in a very humble nature. It is recorded that no matter how simple elites ate, they still refrained from certain food. For upper caste Hindus, onion, garlic, and cooked rice had to be handled in a very careful method for it to be eaten. There was a belief that once polluted, for instance, when handled by a lower classman, the food will lose its purity. However, none of this stopped the elites from eating extravagantly. In Mughal India, large banquets were held in honor of generals and the emperor. They spared no expense, with 1,000+ dishes and halls, quote, elaborately and expensively decorated, end quote, as Father Montserrat, who was a Portuguese Jesuit invited to Akbar's court, put it. There was even an expectation for having clean feet before entering, white tablecloths and flower bouquets scattered throughout the hall. Beautiful women were servers, and a vast array of globally renowned cooks made the meals. Because of this, European pastries and delicacies often made an appearance during these parties. While most villagers never had the chance to try a European dessert, it is significant to note that the lower classmen were well fed in Mughal India. For instance, soldiers of Islam Khan Chisti were provided with 1,000 dishes every 24 hours, consisting of fried rice, meat, spinach, broth, vegetables, and 12 variations of dry bread. Although the lower classmen were not invited to lavish banquets, the royal courts would often have free food stands. It was here that the townspeople could enjoy meals in honor of Akbar. Mughal intentions. Based on the differences in elite and non-elite meals and actions, the underlying intentions and morals of elites can be drawn. The Mughal court did not provide food stands for the lower class, but they also donated grants to assist with things like marriage costs or income loss, which were seen as vital deeds of nobility. Nobles provided common folk with basic life necessities as a form of charity, thus increasing the overall quality of living in the Mughal Empire. However, not everything was done kindly. Foreigners were often gifted by the royal court, but it was deemed protocol to reciprocate with one's own gift, according to Sir Thomas Roe, who was an English ambassador to the Mughal court. During his visit, India had rejected trade alliances with the English, describing their goods as unimpressive and lackluster. This shows an alternate side to Mughal intent behind their actions, one that is much more critical than meets the eye. Mughal rulers often portrayed themselves as simple and humble to foreigners, but were logical with their hospitality. This showcases that their actions were performed to gain public adoration and love. This would make it easier to rule and control people. In this case, there were few social upheavals during Akbar's reign, most likely due to the approval rates of elites. The intentions did not differ far from the Qing, however, were approached differently. The Qing Empire. While the Qing Empire was advanced and flourishing, it held a strict social hierarchy. The empire was established by the Shunzi Emperor in 1636, with Kangxi as its second emperor. While the empire now is associated with China, they were not originally Chinese and referred to as Manchu instead. In Kangxi's empire, elites and upper-class members were considered to be emperor's family and included well-educated scholars, government officials, nobles, and generals. Socially, artisans, farmers, and slaves followed. Under Kangxi's rule, stability blossomed after years of war. He was keen on opening new ports and markets for Western and overseas trading, leading to a silver influx and economic growth. Once Kangxi fell ill and passed after one of his banquets, Yongzhen was announced emperor. Qing food culture. Unlike the Mughals, Qing cuisine varied more according to social status, access to ingredients, and influence from religion. Just like the Mughals, the king relied on rice as the staple of their diet. Rice was typically paired with meat ranging from pig, chicken, and duck. Potatoes and corn, introduced from the Americas, were also popular for both elites and non-elites. Tea was a common choice of drink as it was believed to have digestion benefits. Confucianism was the official religion of the Qing Empire, thus influencing Qing cuisine. In Confucianism, there was stress on thoroughly cooking food, sauces, and seasoning. It was vital to have this blend to create the harmony that was fundamental in the religion. Food must also be eaten in smaller servings to increase the intention behind eating it. Quote, everything in moderation, end quote, was certainly applicable to Confucian dining. Taoism, like Confucianism, also relied on harmony when it came to food. Yin foods were seen as cold and refreshing, like vegetables. Yang foods were considered hot, like meats and broths. To create perfect harmony, you need a blend of both, so vegetarianism was promoted, but not preferred. Taoists also fasted regularly, or achieved Ziran, where it was believed no food consumption would be needed. Along with this, it is important to examine Buddhism's influence on cuisine as well, as it was the fastest expanding religion during the time. It is a common belief to, quote, do no harm, end quote, as a follower of Buddhism, causing more people to be vegetarian. Therefore, meat and fish were considered prohibited, but some parts of China also prohibited onion, garlic, and leek for their smell. Influenced by the Ayurvedic medicinal systems in beginning Buddhism, Buddhists also refer to specific foods as medicinal and ate with the intention of reaching enlightenment. With diets varying the religion, they varied even further based on status. Meals in the Qing Empire. On top of those distinctions, elitism only made Qing meals more disparate. Elites had every sort of food at their disposal. What little meat and wine were available was given priority to elites and nobles. The best teas and meals were served, and they were incredibly flavorful, but once again, they were only for the wealthy. Elites enjoyed these dishes through numerous banquets. Banquets were so popular and prestigious that many people overspent and acquired debt for the sake of holding one. During the parties, it was not only important to have the best food available, but good entertainment was a necessity. Sir George Staunton, who was a diplomat in McCartney's embassy while visiting China, describes in his account, quote, this banquet was preceded by a ball and accompanied by illuminations and fireworks in the garden, end quote. Overall, elites were able to experience operas, poetry, women, gardens, and exquisite food at these feasts. Nevertheless, it was an entirely different story for non-elites. Some rural locations in China were so impoverished and infertile that the population had to resort to an improper diet of pumpkins and salted fish. Poultry was an important dietary aspect that many peasants didn't have access to because of shortages originating in the Ming era, thus increasing the demand for the cost of meat. The lower classmen had much more restricted diet compared to the extravagant meals of the upper class. Common folk felt confined to what they had and did their best not to dwell on the delicacies they will never taste. Regardless, lavish meals were dreamed about regularly by the non-elite people, as seen in poems. For example, Zhao Feng's poem, Shi Xia, expresses, quote, for 20 years, my craving for crabs hasn't been satisfied, end quote, and proceeds to describe them in great detail. This showcases the limitations non-elites were faced with. In contrast to the accessibility to food elites had but didn't share. Qing intentions. The differences in elites versus non-elites meal display a connection with morals. Qing elites did little to give back to the peasantry. There is little to no mention in sources from the time period of sharing, charity, donations, nothing of the sort. It is clear that Qing peasants were not regarded highly in both the empire and internationally. Instead, they mainly focused on impressing others through their wealth, as a way to build their social status. This reveals the true individualistic nature of the Qing elites. They were self-absorbed and self-preserving, focused on vanity rather than the common good. This mistreatment and neglect towards non-elites ultimately led to the riots targeting Qing elites, especially through the mid-1700s. Conclusion. In this regard, we have seen multiple comparisons and contrasts between Mughal and Qing empires. Their meals were often very similar, eating a more vegetarian-based diet with rice at its core. But how the elites typically ate, that's where things deviated. The Mughal nobles ate humbly, while the Qing elites were excessive with their meals. The Mughals were also remarked for sharing their food, while the Qing did not, even in times of famine and hunger. While this highlights the Mughals as charitable, generous people, that isn't the case. Both of the elites acted out with intentions of self-interest. The Mughals wanted to appear particularly kind and to have others regard them better. The Qing elites worked in the same way. They strived to appear grander and to be considered better than other elites. This says a lot about both cultures. While both are invested in self-interest, the Mughals achieve it through philanthropy, while the Qing achieve it by one-upping others. Lastly, here are my references that I used during the presentation. And that is the end. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Sophia. That was an interesting presentation. So let's give her all a round of applause.
Thank you.
As a history major, I quite enjoyed it. We will, again, the commentary form can be found in the chat, and we will now go into our live 5-minute Q&A session. Does anyone have any questions? If so, please raise your hand with the reaction icon, or put it in the chat, or just simply unmute. Oh, okay, we have a few. Professor Chan asks, what's something surprising that you learned during your research?
I think one of the biggest surprises mainly came from studying the Qing Chinese food culture, mainly because as someone with an Indian background, a lot of the Ming traditions and culture can still be seen today in India. However, for the Qing food culture, a lot of it did base upon religion. And in that sense, there were many religions at the time. I know I mentioned Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, but there also is Taoism and a few others along the mix. I think the differences that come with each one and how the religious principles are tied in with food, such as receiving that harmony with food temperature, with the level of spice, and the importance that smaller portions are eaten for intention reasons, I think showcase how important food was for people, but that it should be consumed with still your religion in mind.
Thank you. John Siebelink asks, what was the most challenging part of your research?
I think the most challenging part of my research was ultimately finding the different pieces to connect together. I kind of had two different elements that I had to incorporate to figure out the Mughal and Qing intentions. So on one hand, I was looking at food, and on the other hand, I was looking at food pertaining mainly to elites. So finding both and seeing how elites kind of acted during that time and what their overall intentions were, I think was probably the most challenging. It required a lot of primary sources regarding the everyday life of elites and peasants, so that I can see that contrast, while also figuring out how the display of what they ate in food contributes to their everyday life and their intentions.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question for Sophia. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your approach to looking at these sources through morals and intentions. I wondered if you might just expand a little bit on that.
Mm-hmm. So I think going into it, I think a big part missing in history is really the intentions, and I'm not going to say stereotypes, but kind of the generalized beliefs of what the people held during that time period. And I think going into this presentation, I really wanted to kind of figure out the psychological behaviors of the two kind of cultures I was looking at. So in that case, I feel like I took both elitism. Obviously, elites always have intentions for what they're doing. I believe even in today's elites, you still see like why they go to certain events, why they get the publicity. I think have elites having background intentions that I think everybody knows they exist. So I think in this case, it was really interesting because through food, I was able to see that the Mughals ended up eating very, very humbly and very simply. And it kind of made me wonder why did they do that? You know, obviously they had many resources at hand and that they could easily live just as lavish as the Qing dynasty did for the elites in that period. But the overall meaning behind why they did that was really interesting to me. While on the other hand, it seems so obvious that the Qing obviously put on these very grand banquets, very grand parties to obviously portray themselves as wealthier and kind of up their social status and display how much they have. So I think in that case, when you see that how much the Mughals gave back to the peasants and how much they actually treated foreigners, there was actually a case with Father Montserrat about how the Mughal officials were upset that he published a account that didn't kind of match with how they wanted to portray themselves, which clearly shows that they do care about how they're portrayed. And this is almost a logical approach to wanting to appear very humble, very simple, and just overall better rulers than rather someone who is very lavish and humble and does not care for their people.
Awesome, thank you. That concludes our 5-minute Q&A session. Again, thank you. Give her a round of applause. Awesome work, really.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is from Ryan. No, sorry, looking at the wrong page. Our next presentation is by Tonja Kay Handley. Her mentor was Professor Jacob Strona. This is a pre-recorded presentation with a live Q&A session. It is entitled Gynecological Racism, an exploration of medicinal racism in the field of gynecology, a specific focus on birth outcomes.
Hi, my name is Tonja Handley, and I'm going to be talking today about medical racism in gynecology with a specific focus on maternal mortality. Racism is a topic that is often a point of contention. The uncomfortability and negativity of the subject deem it an inappropriate topic for general conversation. It's my hope that by ignoring the social norm and instead starting and continuing the conversation about racism in America, we can work together to eliminate it entirely. Medical racism is defined by Howard University in their Combating Medical Racism Guide as simply systemized racism, in which there's a dominant racial hierarchy, comprehensive white racial framing, individual and collective discrimination, social reproduction of racial material inequities, and racist institutions integral to white dominion over Americans of color. This is a lot of fancy wording that basically means Black people are more likely to die of something completely preventable simply due to the color of their skin. I don't have enough time to delve into the entire issue of medical racism in America. We would be here for a very long time. What I can and do want to talk about today is medical racism in terms of the field of gynecology, specifically in maternal mortality rates. American gynecology was birthed in the roots of slavery. The father of American gynecology, James Marion Sims, began his practice of manipulating and often mutilating slave women's bodies to minimize the deaths that were occurring related to pregnancy and birth. In essence, the slaves that were dying were becoming an issue to the prosperity of slavery. So Sims opened up the first women's hospital in which he treated slave women for a variety of issues, both related to pregnancy and birth and not. A maternal death is defined by the World Health Organization as the death of a woman while pregnant or within 42 days of termination of pregnancy, irrespective of the duration and the site of the pregnancy, from any cause related to or aggravated by the pregnancy or its management, but not from accidental or incidental causes. Again, this is a lot of fancy wording to say that maternal mortality is any death related to pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. In United States, maternal mortality rates have garnered a lot of interest lately. 2019 statistical data reveals that the maternal mortality rate of non-Hispanic Black women was between 37.3 and 44 deaths per 100,000. In that same year, non-Hispanic white women had a maternal mortality rate of 14.9 to 17.1 deaths per 100,000. This disparity in maternal mortality rates has existed for a very long time. Looking at this graph, you can see that the maternal mortality rate of white women has remained below the average, whereas Black women mortality has continued to rise exponentially. When you look at the United States maternal mortality rate in terms of worldview, becomes even more disastrous. The United States leads the top 10 developed nations by an overwhelming majority in maternal mortality. This statistic is from the 2018 study, where the maternal mortality rate of non-Hispanic Black mothers was 37.3 deaths per 100,000. And for non-Hispanic white mothers, it was 14.9 deaths per 100,000. When you dive a little bit deeper into those 2018 statistics, these two maps represent the population concentration of Black people in America in 2018 and the distribution of Black maternal mortalities. The similarities are striking. The states with the largest Black population also have the largest Black maternal mortality rates. And while the increase in population can attribute to some of the increase, it cannot in any way account for it in totality. The most obvious question to ask is, why is this happening? What is causing this drastic increase in maternal mortality? I'd like to touch briefly on the overarching systemic failure of the American healthcare system and Black mothers. In 2016, the Board of Medical Examiners decided to revamp the death certificate and include a checkbox for pregnancy-related deaths. A study was done in which the maternal deaths were reassessed using this checkbox system. The study showed that in 2016, the maternal mortality rate of non-Hispanic Black mothers was 21.4 deaths per 100,000 without the added checkbox feature. Once reassessed, including the checkbox feature, that number rose to 48.6 deaths per 100,000. For comparison, the maternal mortality rate of non-Hispanic white mothers went from 6.2 to 11.8 deaths per 100,000. Why did this dramatic increase happen in Black mothers? One issue that is attributed to medical racism is the difference in standard of care in mothers that have private insurance and those that have Medicaid or state-funded insurance. Statistically, women of color in the United States are more likely to receive pregnancy-related Medicaid. They're also more likely to not have health insurance prior to pregnancy. This lack of private insurance prior to pregnancy is one of the leading reasons why Black women are 3 times more likely to die of ectopic pregnancies, in which the egg is fertilized and is sometimes implanted in the fallopian tube instead of the uterus. This implantation can cause hemorrhaging and life-threatening infections if not caught early enough. Pregnancy-related Medicaid also ends shortly after the baby is born. In some states, it's as soon as 2 weeks post-delivery. This leads to Black women often missing their 6-week postpartum visit. Statistically, Black women are 3.5 times more likely to die between 6 weeks and 1 year postpartum than a white woman. The most common causes of maternal mortality for Black women is postpartum cardiomyopathy. Black women suffer from this at a rate that is 6 times higher than that of white women. Another issue that contributes to the vast disparity of Black maternal mortalities is the removal of bodily autonomy and the socioeconomic impact. In recent news, Texas has passed a very controversial bill, the Heartbeat Bill, in which the bodily autonomy of pregnant women has essentially been stripped. Women are faced with jail time for choosing to have an abortion. This effort to control women's bodies and their autonomy over their body is nothing new. In the gynecological world, doctors are pressuring pregnant women into having cesarean sections. This pressure is often focused on the low-income Medicaid population. These cesarean sections are often not necessary medically and have severe ramifications for the mothers. Embolisms or blood clots are a common complication from the surgery. These blood clots are often missed when the patient doesn't return for their 6-week checkup, which we've already established can have deadly complications. Another reason that Black women are more likely to miss their postpartum visits is because they are, on average, their work date return is just 2 months after delivery. This quick return date is due to the socioeconomic pressure that Black mothers face. So, what can we do? How do we start to dismantle this medical racism that's so ingrained in the American healthcare system? Well, the answers are simple to name, but extremely complex to accomplish. The first step in dismantling medical racism in gynecology is to create a healthcare system that is universal. And by universal, I mean that everyone receives the same standard of care regardless of insurance status or race. And while it is optimistic to believe that these standards will always be enforced, it's not practical. There needs to be real consequences attached to the disregarding of these universal standards. There should not be any instances in which a doctor who has a disproportionately high Black mortality rate still has their license to practice. The second step in dismantling medical racism in the realm of gynecology is to strategically allocate resources and education to the areas that are most affected. This means educating mothers, really all patients, on their rights as patients. Education is the #1 tool in combating disinformation and discrimination, in my opinion. Along with the increase in education is the allocation of funds to create environments that are conducive to a universal standard of care. There should not be good hospitals and bad hospitals. Every hospital should be equipped equally and employ workers that will sustain an equal opportunity environment and implement a universal standard of care. Finally, and most importantly, we need to dismantle the ties of white patriarchal supremacy in America. This is going to be a monumental task, considering that America was kind of built on it, and almost every aspect of American society has some tie to white patriarchal supremacy. The first step, again, encourage and enhance education. Education is the way to begin unlearning what we have been taught for generations. We also need to begin eliminating the systems that continually create the environment in which racism thrives. We need to revamp, restructure every system to create new ones that promote equity and equality. True equality, not just fake words. Finally, I'm going to leave you guys with the words of Martin Luther King Jr. Black power alone is no more insurance against the social injustice than white power. Truly, to change the American healthcare system and, in a larger aspect, American society, every culture in America needs to work cohesively. Thank you so much.
Sorry, technical difficulties. Let's give her a round of applause. Oh,
Great. All
very
right.
informative
Well,
presentation.
hello, everyone. Welcome
Oh,
to
crap.
our
Sorry,
third
I
day
apologize.
of Spring OMNI 2021. I'm so glad all the presenters are here today, Emily.
I apologize. The playlist kept going and went into last year's presentation, so I apologize. But wonderful work, Tanya. Again, the commentary form will be in the chat. We will now enter into our live 5-minute Q&A session. Are there any questions from the audience?
I just had a question about how I know in recent years, especially with the increase in immigrants to America, there has been a more diversified medical system in terms of doctors, nurses, and health practitioners. How do you think that plays a part in the fight to end the systematic issue in the medical system?
I think that it's very much going to be a benefit of having different cultural perspectives looking in on our system and how we have things categorized and how we kind of structure our system. And I would love to see the impact that it can have if it's allowed to. So I can see it being a very beneficial aspect to revamping our system.
Good job, Tanya. Can you tell us a little bit about the research that led you to include the causation of forced cesarean sections or pressured cesarean sections that you discussed?
Yeah, definitely. So it's very difficult to not go down the rabbit hole of research because there's a lot of it. But what I found through my research is that there was a correlation between low-income Medicaid-funded births that were cesarean sections that were not necessarily medically necessary, but were kind of forced onto the patients. And I actually found a couple of like biographical evidence of moms saying, yeah, my doctor forced me into having a cesarean section. I didn't really feel like I had the choice or the option to not do it. I felt like I just had to have it done. And then from those cesarean sections that necessarily weren't needed, a lot of complications arose because a cesarean section is no joke. It is a major surgery and the complications are a lot, and a lot of women were dying of blood clots and of infections and things like that that are a direct link from having a cesarean section.
Thank you for that question, Professor Strona, and thank you for the response, Tanya. Are there any other questions?
If there are no more, I'll ask another one. Can you tell us about, okay, so do you think more people should have private insurance, or do you think it would alleviate the issue if more people had Medicaid, or if Medicaid was improved? Tell us a little bit more about the way that you would see this issue resolved in terms of insurance policies and the like. So
I'd be a little radical. I would get rid of private insurance because because having private insurance allows you the capability to be like, oh, well, I'll just pay more to get extra services. Whereas if you have one standard, this is what everyone has to go with, and then it kind of forces that one standard to be up to par to that, to have all of those options so that everyone has an equal access to the same care. So I would honestly get rid of private insurance if I could.
Thanks, Tanya.
All right, well, thank you so much. That wraps up our Q&A, a little bit under, but thank you so much, Tanya, for a wonderful presentation. Thank you for all of our participants. And Professor Sleeper, do you just want me to wrap up for the day? Yes. All right, so this marks the end of our fourth session, and this marks the end of our second day here at OMNI. We appreciate all of our speakers who came out today. We appreciate all the professors and their mentorship, as well as all the students who came out to show their support. Thank you for engaging with our program, and we thank all of you. Any final words, Professor or Elizabeth?
No, thank you so much.
Yeah, we have one more day of the OMNI, and it is going to be on campus. Yes, I just said it, on campus with a continental breakfast. And
but RSVPs are closed.
RSVPs are closed, but I will happily share my food with you.
That's not the reason. I have to clear them to be on campus.
It's tomorrow. It is tomorrow. So yes, it's going to be awesome. I'm excited about it because it's almost like a little bit of the future, because I'm hopeful to do a hybrid OMNI next spring with on-campus and online opportunities. So we're really excited. And so be thinking about the students that are presenting tomorrow. Wish them luck. And for all those faculty that are here today, I just want to say you add so much to our program. I'm so grateful to you, Keith and Jacob and Rob and all the different faculty that dropped in. I'm sorry if I'm missing some faculty. Again, I want to call out Elizabeth, who is so instrumental in our OMNI and the preparations and why this looks so smooth. is really a product of her work. The great work of Hugo today as our moderator. I'm so grateful for that. And then also to the students. It's not easy to do all this work right now, especially with applications and all that we've been through this last semester. And my heart goes out to you, but also just my how proud I am of all the students that are taking on this opportunity to spend time. It's not easy what you're doing, and it's so important, and I'm grateful for that. So on behalf of the honors program, just want to say thank you for everyone, and what we're doing here is so important and timely and vital. And I look forward to seeing you in the days to come. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.